Haverhill present.
Greg Lapine, present.
Tom Cooney, present.
I would like to appoint both Greg Lapine and Tom Cooney to the board. They're alternates. They will be sitting on the board tonight, so we do have a full quorum, which is good, especially this time of year. We do have a couple of things on the agenda this evening. Case number 2019-05 is first. 2019-04 was on the schedule second, but I do have a communication from the applicant. So if you bear with me for a moment, I'd just like to deal with some business here. Case number 2019-04, name of the applicant is Denise Bernard, and Van Tenek Inc. The owner of property is Van Tenek Inc. Location 271 Dairy Road, Litchfield, New Hampshire, map 2, lot 47. The applicant has requested another continuance till next month. She is working with, going to be working with the town, but right now she's working with her contractor to try to determine exactly what path she wants to take in terms of residential units and so forth. So I didn't think it would be an issue. So I'm going to make a motion to continue case 2019-04 until next month, which I believe is August 14th, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll second it.
Anybody got a calendar just to make sure?
August 14th.
August 14th. So I have a second. Any further discussion? No. Let's take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. So 2019-04, motion carries 5-0. Will be continued till next month. And if I get any other updates, we'll deal with them at that time. But right now, that's where we stand with that one. Now, case number 2019-05. This was one that we had initially heard in public session last month. The name of the applicant is Thoreau Properties, LLC. The owner of the property is the same. Location is 522 Charles Bancroft Highway, Litchfield, New Hampshire, map 22, lot number 11. There are 5 particular requests that we will be addressing this evening. Hopefully, we'll have enough time to get through all 5. I think what we've agreed to do would be to allow you to kind of present your big picture, what it is we're looking at here. This is what we held off from doing last month. Just to recap, last month, the only thing we did address was the approval to rehear a request for gas station, and we addressed reasons why the board felt that that was okay. So while you're doing that, we will still need to go through each of the criteria for each of the requests. But that being said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Morgan Hollis. I'm an attorney with Gottesman and Hollis in Nashua, 39 East Pearl Street in Nashua. And I'm here this evening representing Thoreau Properties, LLC, the applicant, and Thoreau Development, LLC, the owner. Mr. Rene Thoreau is here this evening with me. I also have brought with me a number of consultants who will likely make some presentation. I'll try to keep it brief, but I'm going to summarize what I think they're going to say, and then they may be called upon, or you may have questions of them. So as we get to that, I'll make the introductions. The property itself is identified as Lot 11, Map 22, having an address of 522 Charles Bancroft Highway. Property is currently vacant, and it is zoned northern commercial, but it is also in the Aquifer Protection District. And the proposed uses of the property for which application was made to see whether a building permit would issue or not was for a gas station with convenience store and a self-storage facility, 2 uses on the lot. And the gas station is proposed to be on the front, and the self-storage facility is on the rear. We reviewed with the town Conservation Commission, made a number of visits to the Conservation Commission to get their input. Also met with NRPC to try to determine what variances and special exceptions would be necessary. As indicated by the chair and discussed last week, we discovered one variance that we had all missed, and that was the fact that the gas station, while having an above-ground storage tank, does run a gasoline line under the road driveway and into the dispenser pumps. So that would fall under a different requirement for underground piping, and requiring another variance in the Aquifer Protection District. We've made that application, but it didn't get posted in time for this meeting, so we'll be back in August. I'm just alerting the board so that you'll all know. We still want to proceed with the rest of the 5 that have been posted. We'll describe the entire project, and then we realize that we have to come back on the 14th to request that variance as well. I think the chair covered what we argued last time about the differences, so I'm going to sort of introduce the site if I may. Also, I did at the end of the meeting last month submit a number of documents for the record, and I know I did ask the chair, did he want me to give copies for each person? And I brought copies for each person because they may be relevant as we go along. So if I might, I'd like to pass them out. The first document I'm passing out for the record is a document which is, again, submitted previously, but it's Convault Above Ground Liquid Storage Solutions, and it is a document which describes and shows pictures of the above ground gasoline storage tank, which we're seeking to use and would be part of our, if you see fit to approve the gas station, would likely be part of your conditional approval that the gas tanks be above ground. So we brought with us a couple of people who can speak to those, and if you have questions about them, once they've made a brief presentation that it's an above ground vault, feel free to ask them questions.
That would also be in this package? That was put in the file, correct?
That report, I believe, yeah, all of those, that should be.
I think I just saw it in there.
But,
Oh, it's probably this one.
yes, it is.
Okay.
Take one and pass it down. The second document I have, which we submitted,
Yeah, yep, so you can have.
So you're mine.
I got one here.
is some information on underground pipe. And you'll hear from Michael Redding of L'Oreal, who's going to speak about the system itself, which will include the underground pipe, for which we'll have to be back on the 14th, but you should hear about the whole system tonight anyway. So I'm going to submit these. There's an email and supporting documentation about the pipe.
So while you're passing it out, let me ask you a question. One of the things that we did discuss in closed session was the order in which to hear these. And consensus is that before we address the overall special exception from 803.A, permit the use of a gas station, we would need to look at the variance from Article 800, Section 803.00, which is the frontage.
Right.
First, before we look at the gas station. use.
Whatever order you want.
Well, now I'm wondering, do we also have to look at the pipe piece before we can look at the gas station use? No.
Well, there is the possibility that if you granted everything this evening, for example, and we came back for the pipe, it might be a problem, but it wouldn't be 100% defective. I've been told you can run above ground gas
Oh,
pipe.
interesting.
And it's not our preference, nor is it the preference of many people.
Yeah.
But it is not totally defective to our
Okay.
application.
That's fair enough.
So-
Appreciate it.
Otherwise, I would have said, if the answer was no, you absolutely cannot do that, you have to have the variance, I'd say, well, we should probably get that first.
So also, if I may, please, I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself, please. We have invited town council to join us for this meeting. So if you would, just for the record,
Laura Spector Morgan from the Mitchell Municipal Group.
thank you very much.
The next document, which I did submit, is called Abtech Industries Smart Sponge, and you'll hear a little testimony from our engineers about how this works and what it has to do with the gas station and why it's important.
No,
And then they also submitted a document which is titled AST Environmental Protection Features. Again, talking about above ground fuel storage tanks and the features involved. And it's a basic summary that's presented rather concisely, and there'll be some testimony about that.
Jeez. It's my sponge.
And then we have a report, one of the consultants on the special exception application. We have a special exception for trying to put a structure, if you will, within the buffer to the wetlands, and the structure is a detention basin. And so I engaged, and my client engaged Mark Jacobs, who's a professional wetlands and soil scientist, to review the application, review in the field what it is, and talk about the impact in terms of the requirements you have to evaluate for the special exception. And this report is detailed and has some pictures and photographs, and when we get to that, we'll be making reference to that. There's a letter addressed to Mr. Rene Thoreau from Mark Jacobs dated June 11th, 2019.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just sort of as we're being inundated with paperwork that I assume the whole board hasn't seen yet, just a reminder that you don't have to make a decision on these applications tonight. The board needs additional time to review these, particularly where they're coming back next month anyway.
And as I've said, I did submit them at the end, but I realized that not everybody would have a chance to look at them, so I just felt like we ought to have them.
Make sure I have that one. Okay.
And then I think the final document I submitted last month was a report from J. Chet Rogers addressed to me. He's a commercial real estate appraiser, and this will go to no adverse impact on the value of the surrounding property should variances be granted. And it's dated June 10th, 2019. And Mr. Chairman, some zoning boards like to label their exhibits and some don't. So I didn't label any of
Yeah,
them.
I got it. I just confirmed that everything you've passed out so far is definitely in here.
Okay,
So for now, I'm just calling all this Exhibit A.
perfect. So the only things I didn't pass out that I think are important to my introduction of the project are copies of the tax map of the town. And I've identified the parcel 22-11, so that although you're all familiar with property in Litchfield, I think it's important to get a sense of what I'm talking about as I'm talking about it.
Where'd this come from?
That was AST Environmental.
You just pass those out? Or we got somewhere else?
Yeah.
So it's in here then?
It should be.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one with the,
If it's not, it should be added. And then finally, the last plan is, again, just so you don't have to strain your eyes. We've got a larger plan here, but even sitting there, you probably won't be able to see what I'm talking about or what
get that.
Mr. Farwell might be pointing you. So I've got duplicate copies of the plan that's on file for everyone.
Not gonna do it.
And there are 2 pages to it. One is non-topo and the other has
I
topo.
already have that.
Look at that. Nice.
Topo. That's topo.
So,
No maps?
All right. Oh, brother. Help carrying this out of here.
Yeah.
so if everyone is set,
Need a bigger table.
everyone is set, I'm just going to introduce the site. As I said, it's on Charles Bancroft Highway. If you're going north from the golf course, Conaway, it's up on the left-hand side, just before you pass under the New England Power Company power lines, and just before the Conservation Commission land, which you all may be familiar with. There's a parcel, it's an immediately abutting parcel, which is owned by the town of Litchfield. It's a conservation area which goes all the way back to the river. Immediately in front of the site, as you're approaching it from the south, the abutting property is a home and a garage. Directly across the street is a single building which was residential. It's currently vacant. It was recently purchased by Continental Paving. There's another property adjacent to that that's owned by Continental Paving. And then further south of that is Warren Adams, who's here this evening, and his property and his number of lots there. So that kind of summarizes the site and the location and where we are. What we're proposing is the front half of the lot is going to be developed into the gas station and convenience store with an entry in and an entry out. The frontage on the property is 398 feet. The depth of the property is quite extensive. I'm going to estimate and say it's about 1,100 feet back from the road. So that's the size of the lot. It is 15.28 acres. But what's particularly interesting about the lot, and you'll hear me in my making of my arguments, is we have a significant wetland area located on the northerly boundary, adjacent to the conservation land. It swoops around the backside of the property, and it's also frames the property on the south. The area itself is defined by the wetlands in that it narrows the property so that the only developable area in the rear is defined by this circle, if you will, where the proposed storage buildings are going to go.
How big is that section of land, do you know?
There's 30, what is that?
Approximately.
Maybe Tobin, you know the answer?
I was trying to, probably 400 or 500 feet by 200 feet wide.
There's a
I
scale.
think that's a good guess.
Scale, 1 inch equals 4.
It's okay, I just was
Yeah.
curious.
So, as you can see, topographically as well, and one of the maps I handed out with the topographic map, the site is defined topographically as well, in that you have elevations 190, elevation 182, and elevation 198. So it's high, goes down, and then you have this sort of ridge, if you will, here, and then it slopes back down. If you've been out there and had a chance to see it, or if you're familiar with the property, it's somewhat cleared in the front area, and then some more clearing towards the back, and then it's all wooded around the wet areas. But that's the site in general. And Tobin can introduce it better. What you're going to hear testimony about is the gas station, which would be the front and convenience store, and also the storage buildings. Again, these are just schematic layouts of what we would do, what we think we would do if these approvals were granted. Obviously, as you know, you have to go to the planning board and the whole thing could change. And if it does change, we have to come back here to say, if our presentation is significantly different than what the planning board approved, you have to go through this process again. And many times, as you know, when you come before a zoning board, you don't even have any kind of a site plan. You're just asking, is the use allowed? But it would be silly to come here and ask for the use without at least showing on some plan, some level of detail, a plan as to what it might look like, so you have an idea. This idea evolved over time. As you know, 2012, there was an application it brought in, and one variance was denied, so it was dropped. Nothing was determined as to what to do in the back. But in discussing this with a number of people and planners, it came up with what would be a good use for the rear portion of the property. Its zone business, northern commercial district, so the general purpose is shops and shopping. Not likely to occur back here, and you'll hear me make that argument. It's also adjacent to a conservation area. It's in a fairly sensitive environmental area because it's surrounded by all this wetland and buffers, It's adjacent to the river, but does not go to the river. In between this property and the river is conservation land. So the first variance that, we can go in whatever order you would like to hear them, Mr. Chair, but the way they were published was storage facility where such use is not a listed permitted use in the Northern Commercial District. I don't know if you want to go the way they're published.
Well, I would, I think that's fine, unless anybody has any other input, other than what we talked about earlier,
Right.
making sure we address the frontage before we address the use for the
Yeah.
gas station in 800.
And I would also say that even if the gas station variance isn't granted, or the special exception isn't granted, we still would want you to consider the storage facility. So they're sort of independent here.
Very good.
So the first application that I want to talk about is the variance to allow use of the storage facility in the Northern Commercial District. And as you know, there are 5 requirements. The first 2 requirements being not contrary to the public interest and not contrary to the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance are somewhat similar, although they have a little bit different nuances as to what you might consider. And it's a burden upon us to prove that if you were to grant the variance, that it would not be contrary to the public interest. Public interest is hard to define, but some of the decisions have said, well, the public interest is in maintaining the character of the neighborhood. So whatever we do here tonight, you don't want to end up materially affecting or altering the character of the neighborhood as to what it exists today, how it's defined. It also shouldn't be really contrary to what the general purpose of the ordinance is. So the first question is, what is the character of the neighborhood? I've described it. I've pointed out what the abutting uses are. You've probably driven by it, at least since the last meeting, to refresh your memory. And as I say, it's in a little pocket of town up there where it's definitely commercial, and it's adjacent. The one thing that's not commercial is the conservation land, but that conservation land is important because it defines what anybody else can do in that area. If you were to allow a storage facility in the Northern Commercial District, this storage facility would be located back from the road. You're not likely to see it very easily. It's going to be separated from the abutters due to the buffers and the wetlands, so it's not going to really stand out in any way. While the general purpose of the Northern Commercial District is to have, and I'll quote it, it's intended to provide for an accessible, well-planned area for local community shopping functions, not for large-scale shopping. This is not going to be a shopping center area of development due to the nature of where it is, the size of the lot, and the shape of the lot. What you're going to end up with is some use there. And my argument this evening is not only will it not alter the character, but it'll be consistent. It's in the back. The church is in the back. It's quiet back there. It's quiet along the river. You won't have any industry. You're just going to have a self-storage accessible facility. So that's in character with what's in the rear of the property. Because they are commercial buildings, it's in character with the other adjacent properties in the neighborhood. It won't generate much traffic, and it's not going to be a significant adverse impact on what the town is trying to do, which is maintain a conservation area back there. It will be quiet. In fact, I think it can be argued that to grant this variance is in the public interest. You're going to avoid having other uses that might not be as friendly to the environment. Storage facilities require very little septic demand as compared to other uses that are permitted in the district. Storage facilities require little traffic control. All of those things which are good for what this area is and what the town wants to preserve back there. There'll be no threat to public health, safety, or welfare, as I indicated with a self-storage facility. You have very little, if any, septic facilities. I say if any because there's a possibility there may be a bathroom, a structure that might be back there for security purposes, that they might require a bathroom. It hasn't reached the planning board stage yet, so we don't know what that'll be. But clearly, if you've ever been to a self-storage facility, you know there are very few bathrooms, low demand for septic or water, low impact on the environment. Everything can be controlled.
So there'll be no live-in, no live-on?
Not at this present time.
premises?
There's not anticipated to be. We're not asking for it, and we don't anticipate it. No house there. The third point is that substantial justice would be done. And substantial justice requires the board to weigh, if you grant the variance, what's the harm to the public or private rights versus what is happening to the applicant. So you can't grant a favor to the applicant that's going to outweigh harm you might do to the public or private rights. And in this instance, if you were to allow a variance, I'm arguing that there will be no harm to the public or private rights due to this particular type of usage. As I say, it's not going to be high buildings. It's not going to be, they're going to be set back from property lines. There's not going to be septic or well demands back there. Very little impact on anyone. So no harm to the public, and yet it'll be a reasonable use of the property for the applicant. So substantial justice would be done to allow something to go back there on the property that makes sense for both the applicant and the town. The fourth criteria is values. There will be no outside storage on the facility. We don't believe that allowing self-storage facilities will have any adverse impact on the value of surrounding properties. And that was covered in the letter of Chet Rogers, where he viewed the property. Last one.
You say no outside storage, hope you don't mind me asking, but, so like people who want to park boats outside?
That is not planned with this facility. It's all going to be internal. We don't want to worry about boats leaking
RVs,
or
those kind of
cars
things,
leaking.
mobiles, whatever they
We don't
are.
want any of that. It'll be all internal structural storage.
Okay.
Mr. Rogers, in his letter of June 10th addressed to me, said, in response to your recent request, I'm pleased to submit my analysis of variance requests to allow, number one, frontage of 395 feet where 500 is required. Number two, storage facility in aquifer protection district. Number three, storage facility where is not listed use in the 800 or 801 zoning ordinance. He describes the site. He took photographs of the site. He reviewed the applications. He reviewed surrounding properties and described them. And then he said there's a high voltage transmission line across the eastern tip. There are tree buffers on both sides in the rear of the property. The subject's gas station will be on the north end of the lot near the conservation land. None of the abutters will be impacted by the granting of the variances to the subject. Neither business will have a significant impact on traffic count. I opine that the proposed variance will not materially alter the character of the neighborhood and will not adversely impact values of nearby properties. So that's an independent appraiser's opinion. He attached pictures to show what he was looking at. Also described the site. So I submit that as supporting evidence to my argument as to why there'll be no adverse impact on surrounding values. We've also, I believe you'll hear from two of the abutters this evening that they're not opposed. We, of course, went to the Conservation Commission with both of these uses and received a favorable reaction, or we wouldn't be here. Both uses were favorably supported by the Conservation Commission and immediate abutter to the property.
So the independent report was based on both the storage and the gas station?
Yes, all three variances we're requesting, yes, storage and gas station. Finally, we get to the well-known hardship argument. And obviously, every board struggles with what that means and what you have to do. I try to keep it as straightforward as possible. We have to show that this property is unique, and we have to demonstrate that because of its uniqueness, enforcing the ordinance against this property bears no fair and substantial relationship to the real purpose of the ordinance. And then if I get through that, I've got to demonstrate that it's a reasonable use given all the circumstances of this property. So the first criteria is, can I demonstrate that this is a unique and unusual property? And I'm hanging my hat on the size of the plot, which I've shown on the tax map, which shows that it's one of the few unusual lots of this size in the area. Yes, the conservation land is equal size, but that's conservation land. It's one of the few developable parcels of this size in the area. It's also adjacent to power lines, and as I said, surrounded by wetlands and a brook. It's essentially like a little peninsula going out into the wetlands, so it has limited development capabilities. So I think that it is a unique piece of property. So given that uniqueness, is enforcing the ordinance that is not allowing a storage facility because it's not permitted under your ordinance in northern commercial. If you were to allow it, if you were to prohibit it, is that a fair and substantial relationship to the purpose of the ordinance? And really, you get back to what is the purpose of the ordinance? The purpose of the ordinance is to develop areas of commercial development. And they talk about small shops. Well, this is not going to be developed. This portion for these storage facilities is never going to be developed for small shops in there. You'd end up having to put a driveway in there, putting back shops in the back. People wouldn't see it as they drive by the road. As you can see by the plan, there's a neck here. So if this parcel could be developed front to back, I couldn't make that argument, but it can't. Here's the narrow neck by which you can put a driveway due to the wetlands and the buffers. So you essentially have two parcels. And I'm arguing that this back piece for this proposed use will not be used for what the purpose of the ordinance says it should be, which is small retail shops. It's not ever going to happen there. So enforcing it on this piece really doesn't have any purpose. There's no reason. You know, the reason you have zoning ordinances, you want to define districts in which you're going to limit uses. To force one to put shops here doesn't make any sense, and that's what fair and substantial relationship is all about. There has to be a connection between the purpose of the ordinance and what's going on the property. I'm saying it's a unique enough parcel that we need some relief from that ordinance, and the relief is grant us the right to put in a reasonable use, and that is storage facility. So those are the 5 criteria that I've covered. If anybody has any questions about the storage facility or any of the 5 points, I'd be happy to answer them.
Before we do any questions, I want to read, make sure I got the right one here. Island. Oh, okay. I thought I had a letter from Conservation Committee on this particular request, but they're addressing item number 3, which I believe is the stormwater
Right.
retention pond in this letter. This one here. So far, put there to a gas station.
No, gas station.
All right, so this one's about the gas station. So I don't really have any letter from Conservation Committee that specifically supports this particular request. So I'll move on.
Yeah,
But
I
you
think
said
that's
you
true.
spoke
I'm
with it.
representing to the board that we went there, and
Yeah.
they in fact endorsed this idea of the storage facility, and I'm representing that as what was said to us at the meeting. I didn't bring the minutes with me, and I probably should have.
Okay.
I thought they might have had a letter, but I will get what I can and submit it anyway,
Okay.
if you decide not to make a decision tonight.
So this storage unit is in an aquifer area,
That's next.
right? What's the next variance?
Because it is not a permitted use in the northern commercial, it's therefore not permitted in the aquifer protection.
Oh, okay.
Has to be permitted within the zoning
Right, so my
district.
question sounds like.
So
it's
if
more
you
appropriate.
deny the variance to allow it in the northern commercial, it automatically denies
Right.
we can only go to the second variance.
There's some different standards that would have to be addressed when we start looking at the same use in the aquifer protection district.
Sounds like my question is better for the next one.
Yes. The arguments are very similar, but
Yes.
there may be different considerations.
I'll hold
you
off.
have.
It's tempting because you mentioned wetlands
Why
a
not?
number of times in
Why not
this
talk about it?
presentation, but I'm with you. I think we'll hold those.
And then we
off.
have a third one, which is the detention basin is going to be encroaching in the buffer.
Right.
And that's to the rear of the property. So we'll get to that, but this is just the variance to allow the use in the northern commercial district. the use of storage, self-storage.
So if it's all right with everybody else, I would defer voting on this and let's take the next one, which is the Aquifer Protection District. Here and present that too.
Why? Because if we deny this, then like you just said, there's no sense in going on.
Well, I don't know. I'm proposing we postpone it. I'll put it to a vote if we like.
I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Any other opinions?
I have a question for Mr. Morgan.
Yeah.
The total square footage of the storage facilities, all the buildings is 32,850 square feet?
I believe that's, is that what the note says on the top of the
Yeah.
plan? Yes,
So that's the
Is
next.
that all the buildings together?
yes.
Oh, just the storage buildings, that does not include the buildings for the gas station.
Right.
That's what you're at.
Okay.
So that's an estimate at this point because
That's correct. Yeah,
nothing's
the
locked
Planning
down.
board may say, no, we don't like the layout, right? You've got to go smaller or have a different configuration or who knows.
So Rick, on your suggestion, I'll second that. I have no problems doing this in a different order.
Well, it's the same order. It's just that I don't know. I was curious to hear I was
The
going
full-
to think
the
we
full
take it all the way up to the retention pond, let him go through all of his
I
criteria,
think it's a good idea.
and we kind of look at this thing holistically and then start to vote on each of the three
I definitely
requests.
second that.
That's what I was thinking anyways.
Mhm.
I'm not
I
sure
don't know,
there's any
it just
harm in
seems-
doing it that way.
No, there's no harm, but I'm just thinking if we did that, how are we going to, how do people feel about the first one? Or-
We'll get to that. I was just saying we postpone it until later.
No, you see my point is that if we already have it in my mind
That you would, yeah.
that we're gonna, oh, this is a slam dunk or not. If you got a lot of questions and people all that are,
Well, you can ask
Yeah.
questions. I don't have a problem asking questions right now.
yeah.
Any other questions? No? Me neither.
Well,
Not yet anyways. There may be more
I
questions
don't
that
know.
come out
it's
as he
just-
presents his
as
testimony.
Morgan, the attorney Morgan just said that, if we deny that, then we'll go on.
Do you want us to vote on this right now, or you want to keep going?
You know, the second variance is almost identical to the first. So I'm going to be pretty quick.
Okay.
I'm just going to touch on the highlights because they're exactly the same arguments.
Right.
So the next variance is to allow use of the storage facility in an aquifer protection district where it's not permitted in the northern commercial. So if we were permitted in the northern commercial, I wouldn't have to ask for this variance. But it's not. And until you grant the variance, I need to ask for this variance. That's how it was determined. I was of the opinion that it's possible you could grant the variance, then I wouldn't need to come for the aquifer protection, the variance in the aquifer protection, because it's now permitted by variance. But that's not how it came out of Nashua Regional Planning. So we're here with both variances at the same time. I think that they're very similar arguments. Again, it's not contrary to the public interest. I think in this case, we have to focus a little more on, is this proposed use contrary to all of the reasons and purposes of why you have an aquifer protection district?
Exactly.
That's not the same as why you have a northern commercial district. So this use is not contrary to the purpose and intent, I believe, because your ordinance states the purpose of the aquifer protection is for preserving, maintaining, and protecting from contamination the existing and potential groundwater resources of the town, regulating against uses that might reduce the quality of water. In this case, as I've stated, this use might be one of the finest uses for protection of water. You're going to essentially have stormwater runoff. You're going to control the stormwater coming off the roofs, off the roadway. It's going to go into a stormwater retention control system, into a detention pond, into an infiltration system, which is going to go back to the groundwater. You don't have any industrial uses. You don't have any commercial uses. You have some cars pulling up, and granted, cars do leak a little oil from time to time, but that's true of someone's driveway. There's going to be very little activity at this use compared to other permitted uses. And that's our case, that, as I say, it's not only not contrary to the public interest, I believe that if you grant the variances to allow this use, it's in the public interest. This is some of the best use you can make of this property. There will be no threat to health, safety, or welfare of the public. I've already counted on that. No, very little, if any, septic demands, very little, if any, water demands, very little traffic concerns. So all in all, there's no threat to the public health, safety, or welfare. It won't adversely alter the character or materially alter the character of the neighborhood. I've already described that in the first variance, but it's the same points. You know what the abutters are. These are going to be low-rise buildings, not high-rise buildings. They're set back from the buffer from the conservation area and from the neighboring church property. It's going to remain treed because it is in the wetland buffer and you can't cut, except for this detention pond I'm proposing. So there's going to be a lot of protection from visibility for these uses. Substantial justice, it's a fair and reasonable use, and there is no public harm if you were to grant this variance for the reasons I've stated. I do think it's in keeping with the general purpose of aquifer protection. Probably if it was well thought out, this might be one of the uses that could go in the aquifer protection district, but it's just not permitted in the northern commercial. Therefore, can't go in the aquifer protection. Won't adversely affect the values of surrounding properties. Mr. Rogers' opinion was consistent for all three variance applications. So I'm not going to read that again. It was his opinion. It wouldn't affect any of the abutting property values adversely. And hardship is the same situation. It's a unique piece of property. And in my opinion, there's no fair and substantial relationship of preventing this type of use in the Aquifer Protection District, because the purpose of the Aquifer Protection District will be satisfied if you grant this variance. It's going to control and limit the bad industrial uses. And your ordinance actually cites some of those uses that they don't want to see. And, you know, it's uses that in fact might cause contamination. So we think that the proposed use is reasonable use for this zone, and we think we've met the hardship requirements. The only other point I will make, and you're going to hear me make it when we get to the gas station, is your Aquifer Protection District was set up for very good reason. A lot of people, almost everyone, had wells. I don't know anybody who didn't have wells back in 2012 in this area. And when your ordinance was drafted, it was really to protect this water source. We all know what the facts are today, which is Pennachuck Water has now delivered a pipeline courtesy of St. Gobain so that everyone up there is on municipal water supply if they want to be. There may be some who are not, and that's their own choosing. But municipal water is now available. The Aquifer Protection District, not saying it doesn't have a value, but the realities of life have to be taken into consideration. And here, you're protecting the aquifer underneath this property for future water use. It's not likely to be withdrawn in the immediate future. We know that PFAS is in there, and it's at a level by which it cannot really be used according to the health standards of the state of New Hampshire. I did look in the state of New Hampshire, and I spoke to the consulting experts, and the proposal, which is pending but not yet approved, so I can't produce any documentation, is that the remediation of PFAS is going to be by natural attenuation, meaning over a period of time, we hope it goes away. There'll be no pumping. Natural attenuation, when I asked how long that could be, they said longer than we'll be here. That is not an approved plan, so I can't present it as that. But that's currently a fact that ought to be on the table in your consideration when you think about, will this adversely impact the aquifer? And the answer is that aquifer has less significant value than it did 4 years ago. It is not the source of drinking water for people in that area any longer. So those are my 5 points that I think are relevant for both of those variances. And happy to answer any questions that you may have about the two variances.
So I did have a question now that I can ask. With storage facilities, there's a possibility that there could be hazardous material stored, or there could be folks doing car work or motor work in the area. To me, that seems like it would be a potential hazard to have a storage facility in such an area?
Maybe someone else can speak better to it. I only know from my experience in presenting cases for storage facilities, most of them prohibit it
Okay.
because there's no one on site, and they have a right of inspecting these storage facilities, and they do regularly. And for that very reason, they don't want to have this problem either. So if you're worried about it, you can clearly make it a condition. Most planning boards do.
Are you guys going to allow storage of motor vehicles in those units? Cars, trucks?
Snowmobiles, etc.
I guess we don't have an answer for that, but if you feel that that's a concern, you can condition against that. Milford did that on one occasion for me. They were concerned, they prohibited it.
And how would that be enforced?
Like any enforcement in town, if someone notices it or if someone has a concern, the owner obviously has a vested interest in not having any problem out there, because if there is pollution, guess who has to clean it up? It's not the tenant, it's the owner. And that's the reason why this use is proposed, so that there isn't any threat. So I think those you can impose those conditions if you're worried about it.
Just to be clear, at least one technical point anyways, on the prohibited uses, section 1254.00, it says you're not allowed, it's prohibited the covering of more than 15% of the lot in a transitional commercial industrial zones by impervious surfaces unless a conditional use permit is granted. I mean, is that come into play? Are you covering more than 15%?
I think we will be, but we would have to ask for a conditional use permit if we are at the planning board.
At the planning board, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, conditional use permits are covered by the planning
Okay.
board. So if it turns out our final design does in fact exceed the requirements, they would require a conditional use permit.
It does look like it.
I think we had estimated somewhere around 30% based on that plan.
How big is the total lot size?
What did I say? Excuse me,
15 acres? Yeah.
15.28 acres.
The siting or operation of a junkyard, and that's right across the street just about, isn't it?
There's an auto salvage facility
I
across
wonder
the
if they're
street.
on the aquifer protection district.
There's also a garage next door to us.
Yeah, I know, they were just here a couple months ago, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on that particular point?
I'd like to maybe go back to 801. 801 clearly says that the footprint in that area should not exceed 20,000 square feet.
Or building?
Yeah, per building. Now, these are multiple buildings, but I would think you would take the square footage of all of them, put them together, and you exceed that by 12,000 feet right now?
Yeah, I don't think, in answer to your question, that may possibly be a subsequent interpretation, but that wasn't what was interpreted when we approached the town staff.
Okay.
They're separate buildings.
So you're basically saying that's not the right way, in your opinion, to look at it? You would argue, if we were to look at it that way, you would argue against it?
Yeah, I would say each building gets on its own merit, and part of my argument is that the ordinance talks about smaller retail shops, a conglomeration of village type shops. So if you had that, you couldn't say, well, let's all add them together. Oh no, now you've exceeded your 20,000 square feet. I think the purpose of that ordinance was we don't want to see big boxes out there, big box retail up and down the street. So
Yes, as departments, exceeding stuff.
they're separate. It may not be the prettiest separation, may not be what everybody would like to see, but that's the way retail gets separated sometimes. They dress it up with landscaping around the buildings, but it's essentially asphalt with small buildings.
But it's still 20,000 square foot in one footprint.
Yes. It would be if it was a big box.
Oh, I had a question and I just lost it.
What was it?
And again, I mean, just as a reminder, the Conservation Commission, you've spoken with them.
Yes.
They're generally in support of this. I think, I mean, I haven't spoken to the Conservation Committee, but I can tell you based on another letter here, which is really relevant to the next one, number 3. Their concern is that they don't have an actual plan. So a form, I don't know what you want to call it, a certified plan, something like that. So I think that's a concern of mine, I can tell you, making a decision on some of this without, as he's looking at the size of the buildings, the number of buildings. Just to clarify, if I'm not mistaken, the layout of these storage buildings, you've laid them out such that they don't actually encroach into any of the buffers?
That's correct.
So it's the fact that the lot sits on the Aquifer Protection District, which is why we're addressing this particular
That's
piece. But
correct.
none of the buildings are impacting buffers.
That's correct. As I said, my interpretation was if you granted the first variance to allow this as a use in the northern commercial, I don't believe you need the second variance because it's now a permitted use.
Hmm.
But that's not the way it fell down, so.
So it's probably better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can see the other side of the argument. To me, there is definite different intent when we look at the ordinances for the Aquifer Protection District versus the Northern Commercial District.
Yes.
So I feel more comfortable treating them
And
separately
and we
myself.
feel we meet them, so
So,
we're comfortable being here.
But I agree that your justifications, there's a lot of overlap there. Your arguments are. I see that. Any other questions on this one? No? The last piece on the storage facility is the,
Retention pond.
now, correct me if I'm wrong, and the reason why I'm saying this is tied to the storage facility is the stormwater retention pond is really just for the storage facility.
The one
We don't
where,
need it for the gas station.
that's correct. We're not going to encroach
So
in the
those
buffer.
3 are kind of all together, if you
That's
will,
correct.
right now.
Yep. And I'll point out for the board, the area. Anybody?
What color would you like?
Any color? Pink, yellow?
Oh, yeah, you did that on our drawings.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
So that's the encroachment that we're talking about, and it's approximately 5,800 square feet of encroachment. This is a buffer, this is the wetland line. So we've got an area where we're going to put a stormwater detention basin, and we encroach in those areas of the buffer. Again, there was some difference of, thank you, some difference of opinion as to whether or not a detention basin is a structure or not a structure. But we went with what the staff recommended, which was come before the zoning board and let them decide if you can get a special exception for a detention basin. The reason I say I'm not sure it's a structure is we're not going to end up with any structural elements. The only thing that one might call structural elements would be riprap on the outflow, the overflow outflow, but that's not, again, not structure. It's not a form. It's not poured concrete. It's not a building. Nonetheless, we're going to be scooping out some earth within the buffer. And so we're here for a special exception to allow that.
So there'll be no piping, underground piping going to that on the facility.
That's correct. Not within the buffer.
So it's all
It's going to
surface.
flow down into the basin. And there'll be no pipes or material within the buffer area whatsoever. Whatever occurs outside of the buffer as part of the developed property, we don't have a plan yet of how this stormwater detention system will come together. And that's why Conservation Commission was a little reluctant because we didn't even know what the square footage would be Since then, we've been able to isolate what would be the maximum intrusion in the buffer zone, because you don't want to just give a carte blanche permit to encroach as much as you want within the buffer. We're going to do it approximately per plan, but I think you can also do it not to exceed 5,800 square feet. So you know that the encroachment is not major, 5,800 square feet.
So what's the intent of it and how's the water get to it?
If I might, Mr. Chair, I'll just have Tobin.
Yeah,
follow.
well, yeah, let's, as long as everybody's good. No
One
one-
more thing. So there's no catch basins, no underground water, no underground drainage whatsoever on that piece of property.
Tobin, the best answer.
That is our theory. This lot.
Come on up here, Tobin.
Oh,
Introduce
oh, yeah.
yourself.
For the record, my name is Tobin Farwell Engineering Services. There does seem to be enough pitch to the property that we can get it to flow by above ground. And we will use sheet flow to get that to the proposed detention basin area. And also, we will put the swale in the, within the allowed to disturb area,
Okay.
not outside the
So
buffer.
the intent, why is it there?
Well, it seems like a very good place for it, frankly. As an engineer, I look at it, say, all right, everything is flowing downhill. Here's this nice pocket of area, which is too small to put a building. We don't want to put any real structure in there. So why not utilize it for stormwater detention, which is frankly just shifting soil around and then vegetating it. It seems like appropriate use for that area, in my opinion.
And you need someplace to put the stormwater.
You need someplace to
put
put
them out to,
stormwater, right?
That's the
And
intent.
clearly, it's not a good, building to go in there, so.
It's just not, that little neck is not, well, it's the lowest point, is not big enough to contain what would be a natural detention pond size necessary. So that's why the encroachment in the buffer, the outside.
You've engineered projects like this for small shopping.
Sure, parking lots,
They must have similar problems with stormwater retention requirements too, right? So even if this was something that was a permitted use, let's say a small shop, they'd have to deal with stormwater as well as that.
And no matter what use you put out there, if you put any impervious control, you have to have a stormwater design, stormwater
And
management.
they'd have parking lots and everything like that if it was.
At least the driveway
Store, basically.
and roofs, so they have to control the drain and put it at the low spot.
You spoke about the square footage. How far into the buffer would the maximum be?
That 20 feet is the closest point that the ground disturbance would be.
To the
Into
water?
the buffer,
Into the buffer.
into the buffer.
Okay, so it'd be 30 feet from the water.
There you go.
That's what I was
And
talking about.
the water eventually percolates into the groundwater. Is that correct?
Event, correct. And there is an overflow structure. You have a 50-year storm event, which would be a lot of water. It's going to be percolating all the time, but it will exceed it. You have a overflow structure, which it spills into and slowly releases the water. So we will not be entirely relying on infiltration.
Just for the record, I'm going to read a letter I have from the Conservation Committee dated June 12, 2019 to the Zoning Board of Adjustment from the Trail Conservation Committee, case number, 003, but it's 05. 2019-05, Thrill Properties LLC, map 22, lot 11. We are addressing item number 3 for the above case. We understand they are seeking a special exception in the Wetlands Conservation District. Unfortunately, we do not know the amount of square footage impact the applicant is seeking. Therefore, we have no comment at this time. And then they reference their second letter regarding the gas station. So you're still in that situation. You don't know the exact square footage, therefore you can't get a total buy-in from Conservation Committee.
Well, we'd be happy to stick with the 5,800 that we presented to the board.
Not to exceed 5,800.
There you go.
And I will say that when we saw the letter at the last meeting, I promptly asked if we could get on the Conservation Commission agenda to discuss the maximum, and they didn't meet in July. So
Oh, really?
they're meeting in August, and we hope to be on that to explain it. And If there are concerns, address their concerns. But we felt good and strong enough to go forward with a size of 5,800 square feet, knowing that that's something that you can well both see visually and imagine in terms of the encroachment. So even if a final design months from now came out and it was slightly different in shape, it would be not to exceed 5,800 square feet.
Not to exceed 5,800 square feet of impact in the wetland buffer zone, is that what we're talking about?
And no closer than 30 feet to the wetlands boundary.
Not exceed 30 feet.
Say that one again.
So it was not to exceed 5,800 square foot of impact into wetland buffers and not to exceed 30,
Not to be closer than,
closer
Not to
to,
exceed 20 feet into the buffer.
yeah, not to exceed 20 feet encroachment.
okay,
He's gonna get backwards.
thanks. Bear with me while I take notes. All right, have we gone through all of the criteria?
No, we haven't,
No.
haven't really started, and if I might, I'd like to introduce Mark Jacobs, who wrote the report, and he covers explicitly each of the points that are required, and I think he can summarize them rather than me regurgitate it, but the report is there. So if I might, Mr. Chair.
Sure, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board this evening. For the record, my name is Mark Jacobs. I'm a certified wetland scientist, certified soil scientist, and a certified professional in erosion and sediment control here in the state of New Hampshire. I have prepared a thorough report of findings based on a site inspection earlier this spring. I won't, in the interest of time and not keeping us here too late, I won't reread it. I will paraphrase from it if it pleases the board.
Please.
In the letter, I review my findings from a site walk earlier in the spring. Mr. Hollis summarized the site description nicely. In fact, that's a problem with being second or third speaker. Someone steals your thunder. So some of my thunder has been stolen already. So I won't review a great deal of that. But what you should keep in mind as it relates to the site, Attorney Hollis described you have one stream with associated wetlands along this boundary. There's another stream along this section of the site. This stream in particular seems to have had considerable man-made enhancements over the years to define the flow, if you will. Again, you've got associated wetlands here and here. You've got this additional stream running north along the rear of the property. All these streams flow in this direction. This stream flows in this direction. This stream flows to the north. And basically the discharge point for all the drainage on the site is that point.
Where does it flow into?
Eventually,
Yeah,
the Merrimack.
okay.
Yeah. It's quite a distance,
Okay.
obviously, and it's very circuitous, but ultimately it drains to the Merrimack. So one of the criteria of concern in the special exception performance standards, if you will, is concerned about see if I can find it here. Proposed use, criteria number one, proposed use, construction or alteration does not unduly restrict the flow of water. Again, this is the discharge point for all the drainage from this site, and presumably a basin in this location, the overflow that Tobin Farwell described would be more or less in this area. So we would be returning the stormwater runoff that's treated by the basin to the exact same discharge point that it is currently leaving the site at. Criterion 2, proposed use not in conflict with any and all purposes and intentions listed in section 1200.01 of this ordinance. That criteria 2, has a number of sort of sub-criteria. And I go through those. I want to focus on we had a brief discussion about the structure, and in my letter, you may notice I've actually pasted the definition of a structure from your zoning, and it doesn't identify stormwater management BMPs as a structure. So if that helps the board, it has a fairly comprehensive list there of examples, if you will, of what constitutes a structure. More importantly, I think it's important to note that regardless, we're not talking about a structure in the buffer. We're merely talking about disturbance of earth, temporary disturbance of the earth for grading to shape and install the basin. I think it's important to note that we're not proposing any direct impact to wetlands with this entire project, and certainly not the basin. The criteria C2C talks about protecting unique, ecologically sensitive, and unusual natural areas. We did note that the beavers had dammed the streams in approximately this location at one time in the past. That dam has long since been breached, and the streams are flowing freely again. And it appears like it's been quite some time since the beavers dammed up that stream. That suggests to me that it wasn't an ideal situation in the first place. Otherwise, normally beavers, if they find an attractive place, they keep returning. Once they get trapped out or once they eat themselves out of house and home, they might move on, but they always come back. And there's some rather large saplings and small trees that are growing in that area that suggest to me that it's been quite some time since the beavers were in there. Additionally, the zoning talks about basin marshes, fens, bogs, vernal pool habitat, none of which exist on or immediately adjacent to this particular parcel. And those indeed are wetlands that are of a higher functional value and more sensitive than your sort of garden variety wetlands, most of which we have on this site. Criteria 2D talks about protecting wildlife habitats, wildlife corridors, maintaining ecological balances. Obviously, the installation or construction of a detention basin will alter upland wildlife habitats. It's unavoidable. You can't develop a site without some impact to upland wildlife habitat. It's important to note, though, we won't have any direct impact to wetland wildlife habitat, which I believe is what the special exception criteria are really geared towards. That being said, once the basin is constructed and stabilized, it will actually become part of the upland habitat, if you will, save for the floodwaters, stormwaters that are in the bottom of the basin. The basin will return the area and become part of any wildlife habitat or corridor that exists through the rear portion of that site. It is noteworthy that you have conservation land immediately adjacent on this side and conservation land across the back by the town of Litchfield. So this migration corridor is not being altered by any of this construction. And again, once the basin is constructed and stabilized with in a short period of time, it'll return to a natural situation out there, relatively natural situation out there. It's also important to note, and I think this is purely coincidence, but the bulk of this area was previously logged and now is vegetated with a fairly dense growth of either very tall shrubs or very short saplings, depending on your perspective. The maximum diameter is about this big, so that suggests to me that I'd say that was logged, that area where that basin is proposed was logged pretty heavily, roughly 20, 25 years ago, maybe. And so most of the larger trees have long since been removed. There are a few trees that would need to come out to construct a basin that takes advantage of that entire area. But it's minimal. You can count them on two hands, the number of trees that would need to come out. So I guess the long and short of that is that the area has already been altered. It would be re-altered, I suppose, but it's not such a drastic change as what occurred 25 or 30 years ago when the area was logged. The 2G talks about encouraging low-intensity uses that can be harmoniously, appropriately, and safely located in or near wetlands. As Tobin Farwell explained, it's important to take advantage of topography when you're citing your stormwater management BMPs. This represents the lowest elevation on the property that's still an upland and is ideally suited for that basin. It's also important to note that in your zoning section 1207.03, it states that the wetland conservation district buffers are encouraged but not required next to man-made sedimentation or detention basins. So your zoning already recognizes that sedimentation basins and stormwater management basins are ideally suited for being located next to wetland areas. So criteria 3, use or activity cannot be reasonably avoided. Again, it's a function of topography. And this area ideally lends itself to treatment of stormwater management. Criteria 4, I think this criteria was intended to address linear underground, presumably utilities, sewer lines, water lines, that sort of thing. That would be in such cases that you'd pick the least impacting alternative, the route that resulted in the least temporary or permanent impact to wetlands. So that the criteria 4 doesn't really apply to our project. Criteria 5 can be shown that reasonable, acceptable impact mitigation measures have been incorporated where necessary and appropriate to minimize wetland loss or degradation. Again, that criteria is geared to a project that is actually proposing presumably direct impact to wetland areas, and we have none as part of this project. Criteria 6, no significant impact on aquatic habitat or rare or endangered species as listed by the state of New Hampshire. We did contact the Natural Heritage Bureau for information on rare, threatened, or endangered species. They did reply and identified a few species in the area: Blanding's turtle, eastern hognose snake, New England cottontail, and wood turtle. The cottontail observation was on your town conservation land, and the abutting the other observations were on abutting properties. There were no observations directly on this property. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are no rare, threatened, or endangered species on this property, but the project can certainly be designed so that those species are protected during construction, and so that's not an issue. And again, this portion of the site, even with the construction of the detention basin, will provide continued migration patterns for those species to the degree they're using it currently. So I don't know if that helps the board. I have a few images that were taken at the site to help you with your decision making, and additionally, I have included a copy of an aerial photograph that shows some of the more recent vegetation patterns out there. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Just give us a minute to kind of look through this.
Absolutely.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned earlier, once it is set and stabilized, how long does it take to stabilize?
That's the short answer to that question is from beginning to end, it shouldn't take more than a month. Sometimes some sites, folks have a tendency to construct these and then wait for one reason or another to stabilize them. I never understood why you would take the time to do such fine grading of the structure like this and then leave it unstabilized with vegetation or erosion control matting or similar. But I'm sure there are some valid reasons. My recommendation would be that the area were stabilized as soon as it's finished.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Earth moving, sure.
Wow.
Yeah, I knew that.
Stands.
Yeah, 'cause he'd be in here.
Oh, I think that-
The base would be over here. Yeah. And then the other piece would be here.
Okay.
I think that covers all of the points of the special exception. I thought it was important for him to go through it before you, because each one of those criteria has to be satisfied. And as he pointed out, I found the pictures and the aerial, and also the wildlife action plan, which is attached, to be particularly helpful. It might be helpful in your deliberations to point out that it's not within the area of the highest ranked habitat of any of these species. It's just supporting the landscape. Highest ranked habitat would be either south or north of the site.
Any other questions on this particular one from the board? Anything else you want to add before I open it up to public?
Not on those three. I'm completely in on those three, and we'll approach the others as we get.
Yeah, so what I'd like to do at this point then is to stick with, so the three requests that he's presented, first being a variance for the storage facilities in the Northern Commercial District, second being a variance for the same storage facilities in the Aquifer Protection District, which you have to understand that sits kind of underneath the Northern Commercial District, if you will, since it's underground water. And then the third request is for a retention pond, which is related to the request for the storage facility units. And that requires a special exception because of the impact to the wetland buffers that they would be requiring. I would like to open it up to the public now. If anybody has anything to say about those three requests, which again are specific to the storage facilities, we certainly would be, like to hear. If you would, go ahead.
Did you have any more questions of Mark,
I don't think so at this time.
if he wants to head out?
Okay, as long as we don't have any questions later on down the road. I can't guarantee you.
Why don't we wait till the public in case questions?
So we'll need your name, please, and address.
507 Charles Bancroft Highway.
How are you, Warren?
Warren's Auto Body.
I know you. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm just glad to know my Anyways, oh.
Yeah.
Dead run.
Tough to get old.
Isn't it though?
I wouldn't know.
Oh, start over. Warren Adams, 507 Charles Bancroft Highway. Pretty much everybody knows me anyways. I was former chairman of the planning board. And as far as this project goes, well, I have a plan in my shop my office that I was thinking about at one time to divide up my property and make self-storage. Give up the idea because of my age and I don't want to get into another business. And that's basically, but the town needs something like that. Number two is retention pond. St. Francis has one right next door. It works fine. If you want to go down to the end of the parking lot and take a look at it, it works fine. And that's basically, I'm very much in favor of the project. I'm very much in favor of the service station, gas station, or not service station, gas station, convenience store,
Yeah.
excuse me. And Mr. Riley knows how I felt about it. A few years ago, we were talking about it in my office, correct?
A little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I can't, don't expect me to remember that far back.
Oh, I remember.
And just for the record, I was there to have my truck worked on, not there to talk about any specifics.
Just came up. That's what all I have. It's just like I said, is, looking, and I was on the industrial committee and we're looking to get some business in the town for a tax base or whatever. And I think this is the next way of doing it. That's all I have to say. Now you're making me get back up.
Thanks. Do we have any other members of the public? Please.
Rick
Oh, who's this guy?
I actually own the property across the street, and I basically either own or have under agreement from there all the way to Romano's, and
Wow.
some 800 acres out there. So I think it's an excellent project to have for the town gas station, the whole thing. I'm not going to stay, but I'm just giving you my feelings on that when you do come to that. You approved storage facilities for me across from the Hidden Creek. I never built them because, quite honest, I don't like the looks of them. But I think this is an excellent place to put it because we're not going to see it. It's perfect. We need it. It's good to have storage facilities. People need it. But this is an excellent location because we're not going to have to see it. And I never built mine because I didn't want to look at them. So I think it's a good place to put it. As far as any impacts to the wetland, it's pretty minimal. We're not going to have any trouble. I think it's a great project. And I think the gas station for the businesses in the area is excellent to have a gas station so we don't have to drive 5 miles to get gas or something. That's it's a plug for the gas station, but I'm not going to stay here to tell you that. I might as well do it all right now. And I think it's enhancing the area. We're cleaning up the Young's property. We're going to either redo the house or rip it down. We're in that discussion. We're coming.
That's the one right across the street.
Directly across the street. Yeah, we're figuring out what we're going to do with that.
Yeah, I was curious about that one. I wouldn't want to have a
The
gas station right across
garage,
the street.
we're coming to you next month. We're going to do it. We have a site plan coming in. And so we'll be coming in for that also. So I think it's a great project. So I like to see it happen.
You said that there were some storage units that were approved as a variance request. I
Yep,
assume,
right directly-
On a previous lot.
No, right directly across from Hidden Creek Golf Course. It was approved.
That big open.
where all the turkeys like to hang out.
Yep. We approved those. That's, I don't know, it's got to be 10 or 12 years ago, maybe longer. I lose track
Remember
going
that.
back.
Do you happen to know the map and lot number for that off the hand or?
No. Oh, it might be.
It's in the open field.
Yes. You know where it is?
Yeah.
Well, I think I know where it is. Yeah. I thought they were using that for parking for Spooky World for a while too, weren't they? No?
It's just too far away.
It's right.
They had some lights up there initially.
Right
yeah.
directly.
Overflow.
The lot, when you drive in, we have the white fence on the right-hand side if you're headed south on Albuquerque. As soon as you get in front of Hidden Creek,
Yeah, it's right over there, right.
right directly across the street.
That you can't see.
They were
Makes
approved
sense.
in there back.
You're right, Rick. It could
So the same type of units.
exact same thing.
But you were gonna have a residence there too, as I remember. That was
Was.
what the
Yeah.
variance was
Yeah.
about.
But I just,
I'm just curious if that's northern commercial or
it's part of it's transition.
transitional.
Yeah, because it abuts April Drive. So when we got the golf course and did all that, we did that at that time. And as far as property values, I can tell you every time I buy a piece of property, I pay more for it than I did the year before. So and when anybody ever says they hurting property values, in my 40 years doing this, I've never seen that happen once on anything. So, thank you.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. More members of the public. All right.
We were all here today.
That's great.
Joanne Giles, 518 Charles Bancroft, which is south of the property that we're talking about. And I just want to comment that I think it's an excellent use of the property, given the alternatives that could be going in there. I'd hate to see cluster housing or there are a lot of different uses I think that could go there. I think this is excellent and I'm for it.
Thank you very much.
Joanne, if you're not going to stay and you want to testify about the gas station, where are we going to stay?
Yeah, I'll allow it if you're not going to stay.
We
That's
can just
fine.
bring it forward.
I'm going to stay
Oh, it's having fun, huh?
and I don't mind a gas station either. So there we go.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Good. Jason Brennan, 23 Aldrich Street. I was also on the planning board for 10 years, a little while back. And I've been following this for a little while, and I agree with the folks back here that I think it's an excellent use of the property. If you take a look at the permitted uses, there are things, I jotted a few down here: offices, banks, healthcare, theaters, things like that. I think that what they're proposing here is really extremely low impact and fits well within the neighborhood. And I think if you look at all the different potential uses for this piece of property and the constrictions that you have with the wetlands, that this really fits best. In addition to that, the land kind of slopes downwards. So I think there's going to be minimal visual impact as well from Route 3A. So I really think it's a solid plan. Regarding the wetlands, it sounds like they've also done their due diligence here. I do stormwater for a living. It sounds like there's nearly a net zero impact involved here, so I commend them for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any other input from the public? Any other questions? Nothing. You have anything else you need to add?
You're not. Thank you.
No, any other questions from the board on these particular three? Oh, having said that, then I think, what I'd like to do anyways, if everybody's okay, is I'd like to close public input and deliberate on these particular three items relative to the storage units. And I could entertain a motion.
To close that.
Any questions? Well, I'll do a motion to close public input first, yeah.
Second.
I have a motion from Greg to close the public input, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
So, what you feeling? Any?
So how are you going to capture all the details about the 5 criteria? You gonna ask anything, paperwork? or-
Same way I always do. I look at the paperwork that they submitted, I look at my notes, I look at the minutes, and I try to draft a decision. However, in this case, I'm actually going to get a little bit of help out of our attorney as well, to make sure that,
We got it all covered.
that we've got it, the way
Yeah, well, I'm just,
it needs to be.
I propose a couple of minute break.
You want to take a break?
Yeah.
As in like a bio break or a private meeting with the town council?
Kind of break.
A
too much.
nature
Stretch your
break.
legs?
I'll be right back.
Stretch your
And
legs?
she can stay here.
Okay. I'm just gonna take a 5-minute break if anybody wants to. Couple minutes, that'll be fine.
Getting old, you know.
Sometimes Pete's showing up.
We're still alive, so don't do anything weird.
That's okay. You don't have a pause button?
I mean, not really. I can end it and then like do part 2, or I can let it run.
It should be quick. It should be quick.
Should be quick. We'll try to leave it. I'll just zip it.
Black, red. I was gonna go online because I didn't remember my dad would shoot me.
Still doing the tractor pulls? Or is that a,
I'm kind of preoccupied this year. I haven't gone any yet,
Yeah.
but I probably will be in Boston and
I was, Newball, I was, just at a cruise night at, in Bedford, Murphy's Tap Room, I think it's called.
Out there.
And I met a gentleman who was big into the tractor pulls, and I asked him if he knew you. He said he knew you. I can't recall his name, quite honestly. But
I do think with the John Deere B, that people can imagine.
yeah,
Anyway, they got a lot of trophies in ribbons and stuff.
there you go. Yeah, he was big into the vintage tractors, so you guys have probably crossed paths.
I'll try to pull it again. No, I, Talbot got it pretty much in the normal.
Yeah.
Make you guys happy.
Retirement is good.
It is good.
One thing that I look at, and that, my wife do with all that. It's horrible, keep cursing you to.
What are you gonna do with the classics? You got some classics back there, don't you?
Yeah, try to sell them.
Yeah.
They don't sell them, precious.
Interesting.
I didn't pick up truck.
Oh, yeah. He's talking about he's gonna get some parts for his truck, right? He's looking at him. No,
I found the
I sold one. He was all 70.
I finally got the GTX running right. It took me 3 years to do it, but it's running good now.
one true to the year. I didn't like previously because it wasn't true to the year.
Yeah, I'm just dying with anticipation. I didn't want to leave my chair. I was afraid somebody else would take it.
Thank you. Oh, gotta be careful.
Well, it's like, just cleaning up Debbie's space.
It's the worst I've ever seen it. My little notes.
I don't know what to tell you. I guess we'll have to go through all this.
Oh,
It'd be nice to, so, you know, she's going to have enough of the details of what his,
Yeah.
about what he said, right?
This is why I feel so bad about like being the chairperson of the board, because I'll spend the next 2 days trying to do this notice, the decision document and all that good jazz.
Yeah, that's a lot of
My
work.
problem is I'm never gonna find anybody to replace me once I find out all dumb stuff that I do.
Hey,
I know, it was hard enough finding somebody to replace you. But back then, we had people in the office that would do most of what I do today. I have to do all my own certified letters, I have to do it all.
well, yeah, but I mean, as far as the decisions and whatnot, that was all on me.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Oh, you ready to take it back on again now?
No,
See?
never. Consider that. Tom has been making noises like.
Is he?
Yeah.
We got a new guy on the board too, Mark Filardo.
Mark Pilato, yeah.
That's how I say it. We're gonna get him up to speed real fast.
Well, we've closed public input. Do we need to wait for others to come back before we start?
I would like to.
Okay.
Because I'm actually gonna open public input again. I got a couple more questions for Attorney Hollis.
I wouldn't do that. People have left.
What? I thought they'd come back in.
The public is
You
not.
can ask questions, right? Can I ask questions?
Not after you've closed the public hearing.
So I
Interesting.
can't ask them a question now?
You closed the public hearing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Oh, in the past? Well, okay. We've been advised that we could reopen public input from,
Can reopen public input, but in this case, you've had abutters who've left the room. Now, in this case, the abutters were all in favor of it, so I think the risk of doing it is relatively low. However, technically, once you close the public hearing, if people leave,
No more questions.
So we were always flexible with
I
those.
did lose one abutter. Right? Okay, no problem then. I was just gonna ask for a little more clarification on the uniqueness of the lot. Reiterate it, but I mean, I took my notes.
Yeah.
and like I said, where everyone was in favor, I think the risk of doing it here is low.
The uniqueness is quite clear because it's,
Well, that's where I was leaning
it's like,
too.
a,
I mean,
you got a little lollipop in there. It's like,
Yeah, they're pretty much, you got this neck down here.
yeah. That's,
So we're reconvening?
yes.
Yes.
so do you want a motion or do people
we
need to
deliberate?
discuss it?
Let's deliberate.
Okay. What do you want to deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, personally, I
I have another.
find the first one easiest. I think it is reasonable use to put it in the northern commercial district.
Yeah.
I think they've met the standards based on what's been presented so far for storage in the northern commercial district.
So I would argue that there's other uses that could be used. They suggest that it won't be used in very many other ways, and it could. But I think personally, this use of it is reasonable, especially for this lot that's surrounded by wetlands. It's not a bad use. It's not the way it's documented, but I think it's a reasonable use. So I would agree with them, even though I would disagree that other things could be done with it.
Oh, sure. I would,
The
I
other things
would agree with
could be done.
Could be
yeah,
done,
the way
right,
they
right.
presented that, yeah. Also, the fact that the conservation, at least there's been testimony, I don't have it written, but I'll take Attorney Hollis for what he's saying, that the Conservation Committee is in support of the project. They have some concerns around the swale.
Right.
Or stormwater basin, is probably the correct term.
See, I look at that as a positive thing, because if there's any danger in releasing of stuff, that's going to be a way to catch it very quickly.
Yeah, it's just in building that, how much damage is going to be done. That's what I think where they.
If
have
I
a
could just
question.
focus the board, since I'm the one who's going to help you write the notice of decision, I think you're deliberating at the moment on the variance in the northern commercial zone. So if you could focus your
Right now,
comments on that,
Yeah, not
that would be
the
helpful to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of spread around, yeah, okay. What was the other one? And there was one comment about the value of the watershed. I think that's not something we need to worry about. It is in.
not in this particular, we're just
No.
talking northern commercial
Right.
district right now.
But for this, yeah.
So for northern commercial district, I think it's a reasonable
Storage,
use. I
yeah.
think the argument that they presented where this is in fact perhaps a more desirable use for this particular lot, in that it's surrounded by all these wetlands and sits on top of the Aquifer Protection District, that it may be more a preferable use, if you will,
Right.
for that particular
That's what I'm saying too.
area than the storage being a more preferable use.
Exactly.
You know,
And I think the land
I was
is
swayed by that.
very unique. So, that was clearly spelled out. I think the fact that, you've got all that wetland around there, to use it for other things is like,
Right.
I don't know. And I like the idea that I'm glad that Rick made the comment about not wanting to build them on Albuquerque, because he had the variance to do
Mr.
that.
Charbonneau?
Yeah, Rick Charbonneau.
Yep.
And his comment was he didn't like looking at them. So this way it's like,
You
yeah,
won't-
they're
you won't
back
be seeing
anymore.
this too
We
much,
don't
yeah.
see them anymore. So I like that.
So I'd make a motion to accept the use variance.
Whoa. I'm going to need some more discussion about the variance criteria. Specifically, I haven't heard any conversation about the public interest or the spirit of the ordinance, substantial justice. So if we could talk about that,
Let's
that'd be
do one
great.
at a time, right?
Yeah, that'd be fabulous.
You have,
It's the downside of having me here.
it is. But I used to try to herd these guys. And I was like, I'm
I'm
glad
looking
you're
for the responses to the criteria, which they're now spread out amongst the table. I passed out stuff to you guys that I shouldn't have.
Would you like my copy of the application? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, if that's the whole, yeah. That's what I seem to have intent.
So you're looking for which one first?
I would like you to go through all 5 of the variance criteria. I feel like you've addressed the 5th variance criteria, which has to do with unnecessary hardship. We've talked about the uniqueness of the property, the reasonableness of the use.
Okay.
But if we could talk about the public interest and the spirit of the ordinance and how this
All
is in
right, sure.
keeping with those, that would be good.
The spirit of the ordinance is, they were talking about what they were looking to be in these areas is, clusters of small shops or small scale shopping centers. They didn't want any big department stores or anything big. They were looking for
small
small
buildings.
things. And the key word in this here is encouraged for the zone. So they're kind of making suggestions. So I think the intent is just to have it small scale development, nothing large. And I think that this use is fulfilling that requirement, I think.
So we vote on each one of them, right?
You don't need to vote on each one, just a little discussion about each
I
one.
would agree with you, what you're saying there, Greg. I mean, even what they've captured here,
It's more like a suggestion because it says encouraged.
the intent is to encourage commercial development. This is clearly commercial use.
Right.
Why storage facilities are not listed,
Well,
quite
they just-
frankly, is a little,
They just didn't think of it. They can't think of everything.
I understand, so
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure why it would have been it wasn't
Well,
specifically prohibited.
Yeah.
It just wasn't specifically allowed either.
Large, yeah.
And as I look at some of the other uses that are allowed, I just think that this is a less intensity use. Still a commercial use.
Considering the lot.
Considering a lot, I think you kind of want that lower intensity type use. So I think you're meeting the spirit and intent by allowing commercial development. And it's probably a more reasonable use considering the specifics of the lot. So I don't see how that's, doing any harm to the public. I really don't. Again, strictly speaking, in the Northern Commercial District for the time being. And to me, as we've discussed in many cases before, public interest and the spirit of the ordinance, these things are pretty much linked. So I think the reasoning behind one is very applicable to the other.
You get the 5 things.
Yeah, right.
So we,
So I'm good on 1, 2, and 5. Let's talk about substantial justice and diminution of property values just real quick.
and there's no way that I would diminish any of the properties around there. They're all commercial or, this is not a.
Well, yeah, you look at the way that they've placed the buildings being set back on the property, and we've heard that based on elevations, the property slopes downward. I think you're gonna have minimal visual impact. The surrounding properties are commercial. You do have a large horse farm with a big horse barn
That's on the far side.
on one side, on the other side of the power lines.
When you get the power lines, the big power lines.
Yeah. You got a house across the street, but that's being demolished, sounds like, and turned into commercial use.
Well, that's actually,
An old house.
that may not have
Empty house.
a lot of direct visual because of the slope. They may not
Right.
even
Yeah,
even
even
see
still.
some of that.
And we've got, an exhibit here from a real estate company essentially testifying or presenting their opinion and analysis essentially with some data to back it up. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it all.
Yeah.
But, in their opinion, it wouldn't diminish properties, and I have no reason to
I don't disagree.
really disagree with what was in there. I did a quick scan, but it had more information than I've seen in the past from a real estate agent who just writes a little letter.
Yep.
This had properties and everything listed around it.
Thank you.
Is that-
Now I'm ready for you to make a
Was that
motion.
all of it?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion to accept the use variance,
Grant,
the grant the use variance, yes.
grant the variance requested.
So I have a motion, I believe, to grant a variance from Article 800, Section 801 to permit the use of a storage facility, basically on map 22 lot 11, where it's currently not allowed because it's in the Northern Commercial District. So that's the motion to grant that use. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Nope.
No?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0 on the first part.
Now I'll trade you. This is the second one.
I knew I had all of these. I was wondering where they went.
Oh, wait,
These are your copies?
This is not what I gave you. What did I give you? I
Oh.
gave you that one. So
Oh, good. Perfect. So these are your copies. I had the same thing printed somewhere. Okay, so now we're on the second part, which is same facility, but in the Aquifer Protection District.
Well, I would say number 5 is the hardship, right? I think
Let
it's
me
a
first start by reminding everybody, Aquifer Protection District. Purpose and intent. Promotion of health, safety, and general welfare of its residents by preserving, maintaining, and protecting from contamination the existing and potential groundwater resources of the town and protecting the surface waters that are fed by groundwater. This is accomplished by regulating land use practices generally related to commercial industrial land use, such as, but not limited to, the disposal of storage of solid waste, sludge, subsurface waste disposal, road salting materials, gas, or other petroleum products, and including home businesses that might reduce the quality of water that is now and in the future will be available for use by municipalities, individuals, and industries. And then it goes on to say the maps are provided at the end of the section, et cetera, along with district boundaries. So I think the big difference as we look at this, I mean, the uniqueness of the lot, we're still dealing with the variance, same 5 criteria. But we have a different purpose and intent
That's about the
of
only.
this particular ordinance.
And,
So
if you agree with me, I think this is the only one that you need.
I would agree that I just need 1 and 2 if the board is going to make a consensus that 3, 4, and 5 are exactly the same.
Right?
that's where I was headed.
All right.
Seems to me.
So this, now the spirit intent, I think, is met because there's going to be minimal, if any, contamination of the groundwater because well, I don't know how you tie this in, but they talked about the retention pond.
Right, I think that actually helps.
And I think it's, any business, anything that goes in there would have to address this issue. They're going to have to pave, they're going to have buildings, they're going to have runoff. And I think that, if it was businesses, they'd have to have additional septic systems and whatnot. There isn't anything in here that talks about wastewater, human wastewater.
So
So
there's
I
no
think it's
plans for septic.
the most minimal
Right.
possible contaminating. So I think it really meets that the spirit and intent of the ordinance.
So this might be an area, if we decide to approve, that we would add a stipulation to prohibit storage of hazardous material.
If we really felt strongly about storing of automobiles and,
Right.
I mean, I don't know what you describe, motor vehicles? Maybe, is what you catch all, I don't know, motorized vehicles,
Well,
Yeah.
you know?
some people like they don't have,
Yeah, so
I don't know.
I did think
I don't
about,
know, I'm
I did
saying.
think about the concept.
Let's go one at a time. So are you satisfied with?
I am satisfied with your discussion of the spirit of the ordinance, yes.
I think, as they've said, captured it here too, it's not going to change the essential character of the neighborhood, nor will it threaten to harm the existing and potential groundwater resources. Based on what we've heard today, based on the fact that the Conservation Commission has already looked at this, based on the fact that the Conservation Commission has kind of even extended support beyond the actual buildings into the retention pond. They're looking for a more
Concrete.
definitive plan.
Right.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've heard testimony here that in general, they're in support of all this. I mean, I tend to go with the expert testimony, and I include the Conservation Committee in that.
Yeah. We have their expertise, yeah.
Yeah, that helps keep me in this camp where it says, okay, I guess having all that input from all those people leads me to believe that, the spirit of the ordinance is going to be observed here. And therefore, I don't see it as being contrary to public interest. Again, even in many cases, it's the same thing. It's a commercial use. And the testimony here has been that particular, we're on the retention pond, are we not now, or are we?
We're not on the retention pond
Not on the
yet.
retention pond yet. Okay,
It's
so
not
we're
there yet.
still on the actual, yeah, we're on this piece.
Reel you in.
Okay, I was gonna say, granted it requires a retention pond, but anything you put there, that was, most commercial uses would require.
Require, yes.
That I can think of.
That's what I was trying to say. I mean, that would all be part of this.
Yeah.
We're not dealing with that retention pond.
No.
Other than the fact that there is one, we know they're handling the wastewater, the runoff water into, and it sounded like the description is good. Now we have to talk about later on is allowing them to
I think,
go into the buffers.
I mean, as far as the aquifer, it's just, are we gonna put any stipulations on what can be
Right.
stored
I
there?
would say that's about it, yeah. Because for me, you can't say that this is not going to be contrary to the public interest without considering the fact that it requires a retention pond. And evidence has been presented here that says, well, that's a good thing around these wetland areas. It's an allowable or an acceptable thing around these wetland areas. So that for me says it's not really contrary to the public interest.
Yeah.
I have to bring that pond in because of that.
No,
Because we're talking about the
No,
aquifer
that-
protection district, it's a storage facility, but you can't have it without the retention pond.
and that's,
You know.
that's appropriate. They talked about how they're going to do that and on the drainage, that's appropriate. What we have to do next is to talk about them building that.
That's the next one, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's appropriate to talk about for this particular
Okay.
variance.
So the only testimony that we received that I would not agree with is whether there's any diminished value in the aquifer. It is an aquifer area, therefore we need to protect it regardless of any extra activities that may or may not have gone on. So that's why I think that line of argument really doesn't apply.
Yeah, no, and I don't think that any of this is,
So is that what you feel?
I'm leaning towards
We should
approving
put
it, but I'm on the fence
stipulations
about.
I would think that we would require a stipulation to prohibit the two areas that I
Right.
tried to think about, because I was kind of chewing on this a little bit, was prohibiting the storage of hazardous material and prohibiting working on motorized vehicles. When I thought about it, the storage of motorized vehicles like snowmobiles, lawnmowers, et cetera, I don't think that's a big hazard, but to allow working on those vehicles is more of a hazard
yeah.
than actually having
The only way
a
you're
snow
gonna,
blower or a wave runner or a snowmobile actually stored there.
I think the only way you're gonna stop that is by prohibit that from being stored there.
So that being what?
Motor vehicles,
Prohibit the storage of motor vehicles.
yeah, and I wouldn't just prohibit it to just motor vehicles, but I would say, boats and whatnot. I mean,
Well, there's a long list of
Yeah.
of motorized vehicles.
Well,
That's why I'm
and I
saying
would
I'm
say
not sure if we want
motorized.
to do that. But I mean, of all the possible stipulations, I would suggest adding the stipulation to prohibit storage of hazardous materials.
I think that's covered.
I
Tell you the truth, I
You
think
think so?
that's just,
There's no harm in
doesn't have-
adding it as a condition of approval.
Yeah,
Yes.
I wouldn't say boats, you'd have to say the motors.
That's why I'm not sure.
I think it's motorized vehicles. I mean, in general,
I mean, because
I
we
know
talk,
I know my own habits and whatnot, and you know, in storage facility, if I had a storage facility and I was working on something and was there, I would
Do it there.
oh, yeah.
You would work
do
on
it
it.
there.
Yes.
You know,
That's what people do.
and
Yes. Work out it where it is.
I'm sorry, but that's just I see it as motorized vehicles.
And when you say motorized vehicles, you mean cars, boats, lawn mowers,
Yeah, I mean, like anything that has
Snowmobiles.
gas in it.
anything that has
Snow
gas in it. Okay.
blowers.
well,
Yep.
then
Yes,
that's,
and all
It's
that.
a
isn't that
long
considered a
list.
hazardous,
Considered hazardous material.
That's,
Well, then I think you need to make it clear that if you're going to prohibit the storage of hazardous materials and you want that to include gasoline, that includes gasoline in motors.
I think we can
That's
say
what
that.
because I don't, if they drained it out or something, I mean.
And it's okay, right? They drained it.
Yeah.
No.
You know, they're gonna put it there anyway. What are you gonna go check each one?
You say that, you say that, but I think this gentleman right here is sitting in front of us is gonna police
So
his
we're-
property if he
I know, and we're
knows.
gonna say no storage of hazardous waste, no gasoline storage in motors.
I mean, when they rent these facilities out to people, they tell them what they can and cannot store there.
Yeah,
You know?
Yeah, I wish there was a set of
I
rules or
don't wanna-
something like that.
you know,
that we
'cause
could
some
go
pe-
by. I don't
people
know- I
have,
don't know
like,
storage facilities.
you know, cars, they store cars in there and whatnot, and if they've drained the oil and the gas, if we put that stipulation in there, I don't see any reason to.
I will
And then
tell
we can
you-
say no.
I will tell you that there was once a time that I found 55-gallon drums of oil in one of those facilities.
I'm sure you
So I'm
have.
just,
And there's no way you can prevent that unless they're
Yes,
they're
I
diligent
understand
about inspecting that, and that's what we gotta do.
But if you don't,
If you
That's
tell them,
hazardous
that-
if you don't stipulate it, then they don't have to enforce it.
So I think we're
no,
pretty
we are
clear on what
stipulating.
we're
I'm
trying
saying we
to
gotta
do.
stipulate it, but I don't
We have
think
some
you can
differing
say,
opinions.
don't put a car in there.
So I'll ask for somebody to tell me how they would frame their stipulation. Or not.
Let's see. I would say no storage of hazardous material, including gasoline or oil, substances within any motorized vehicle.
I would second that.
So you're saying we put a stipulation on there that says we would prohibit the storage
Of any
of
hazardous
hazardous
material
materials, including gasoline or oils,
in any motorized vehicle equipment
any motorized vehicle.
or equipment. So you can cover lawnmowers and snow blowers, if that's what you're worried about.
I think that's okay.
No.
I definitely think the hazardous material is a good part.
Yeah.
The other part I wasn't so.
So we're saying we would approve it with that stipulation, is that what
Well,
I
I
mean?
have one question though.
Go ahead.
Just, and I apologize, I want to ask you. That leaves it open for vehicles to still be in there.
As long as they're drained of gas and oil.
And
And there are facilities that store cars over the winter.
It's going to be hard to enforce.
Yeah.
But I mean.
But I think if you have a diligent property owner who makes a reasonable effort to do that, that's really the best you can do in this
I
situation.
think what that does is minimize the danger of contamination to the aquifer, which is, I think, what we're concerned about.
I think,
Well, and I think that that's all paved, it's like, you know, when you have to worry about the runoff, so.
No,
now the
no,
other
but that's,
question I wanna
you
ask
do
is,
have to
are we also
because
gonna not allow working on vehicles.
Oh, you can add that if you want.
Because although my car does not have oil or gas in it, if I want to do my work on that vehicle and I'm going to have all the tools and the materials that I need to work on it.
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm asking.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I personally,
It is.
I'm a little,
Well, if they can't change their oil.
I'm a little concerned about talking about automobiles and gasoline and
that's
stuff.
hazardous.
And our next question is gonna be a gasoline station on the same lot.
They have to.
But that's different.
Yeah, that's
That's a
completely
permitted
different
use.
discussion.
Huh?
That's a permitted use.
Yeah,
that, this is different because the storage of fuel now it's contained to a tank and
I know,
whatnot.
above
So
ground.
it's different.
So we'll get to that.
So What I would need then is a motion to either approve or deny, and if you're going to approve, I need a stipulation. I'll take anything like that.
Well, I gave the stipulation.
So you want, so you're
So
giving me
I'm making a motion to
approve?
approve the granting of the variance to the Aquifer Protection District.
Do you want me to read back the condition that you said?
Please.
So I think what
There will
you're,
be no storage of hazardous material, including gasoline, in any motorized or, what was the other word? Motorized vehicle or,
I had no storage of hazardous material, including gasoline or oil substances within any motorized vehicle or equipment.
okay, that's what I wanted to say.
And then did you also want a condition to prohibit working on those vehicles or no? No? Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
So there's a motion on the table to approve it.
I'll second
I'll
that.
stick it.
Well, you guys are quick. To approve section,
9 o'clock.
I'm sorry, to approve the variance from section 1250, article 1253.00 to permit storage facility in the Aquifer Protection District with the stipulations that were mentioned. So that is what we're voting on. Do I have
Yep.
any further comment? No? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So that motion carries 5-0. Now we move on to number 3. Oh,
No. Oh, right here. Yeah.
thanks. I love it. Okay, so number 3 is the request for the stormwater retention pond.
How do, oh, Laura, how do we have to handle?
So this one is slightly different because there are a specific list of criteria that you need to meet. So what I would suggest you do is that you open up those applications, you read the criteria, and you discuss why you think they're met. And I think that if you think they're met simply for the reasons that are stated in the application, that is an adequate discussion.
I think they're all met.
Yeah. So, the proposed use, construction, and/or alterations shall be constructed in such a way that does not unduly restrict the flow of water because their explanation is the proposed use is an infiltration basin controlling stormwater runoff so as to allow it to infiltrate the soil rather than flow into the adjacent wetland, limiting the impacts on the wetlands.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Construction in such a way that not, yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I heard that that's the way the water flows today.
Yeah.
All they're pretty much doing is just
Downhill, yeah, towards that
refining
area.
it, changing the vegetation, taking down some trees. Once again, Conservation Commission is somewhat in support of this. They're just waiting for some specifics. Solid plan, which we have a commitment here that the plan will not exceed, I believe it was 5,800.
5,800 square feet.
So on this one, I think you need a condition of approval that the impact will be no more than 58,000 square feet.
5,800.
5,800 square feet, and that it will be no closer than 30 feet to the wetlands.
No, that's
Yes,
correct.
that's
No,
actually
30
perfect.
feet encroachment into the wetlands.
And I have a couple of other conditions of approval that as Mr. Jacobs was speaking, I thought you might want to consider.
Okay,
Um,
let's hear it.
First, he mentioned that there were some rare, threatened, and endangered species on the abutting lots and that the
Correct.
project could be designed to protect those on this lot. I would suggest you make it a condition of approval that to the extent possible, it be so designed. And also, there was a conversation about stabilization of the area and how long that would take. And so I think it would be a fair condition of approval that you require they stabilize immediately after construction.
Those
Do you
are
have a
good.
time frame?
Well, because remember Mr. Jacobs said
Yeah.
that sometimes they let it wait, so you finish
he didn't know
construction,
why.
you do stabilization. Yeah. And I think if you just say immediately after construction, that's enough.
I agree with both those stipulations.
No, that gets added
And that's
to the
just-
overall approval,
Yes.
not just for criteria
Correct.
number 1.
Correct.
And
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, but you mean immediately after the retention pond is constructed?
Correct.
Not the facility.
Correct.
I agree.
So we still need to go through the rest of
Yes, please.
Prevent
it. So the
development.
pros, go, oh, you got one?
Well, it's 2A, right? Prevent the development of structures, you want to read them?
Oh, I thought I was on proposed use is non-conflict with any and all of purposes and intentions listed in section 1200.01
Yeah, that's the
of this ordinance because.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a number of criteria in 1200.01.
right.
Yeah, so I was
But what
reading
is, in summary, the retention pond is to ensure that water is redirected to an infiltration basin and does not overflow into the adjacent wetlands or directly into the Merrimack River, and is otherwise a permitted use in the underlying northern commercial district.
So, yeah,
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess that would be allowed in the northern commercial district.
so they're not going
Intentions
to,
listed in section 1200.01. See, yeah, and if you go and look at 1200.01, we're talking about a retention pond. It's not a structure. This was brought up a few times. And the fact that retention pond is kind of a good, well, doesn't do harm, apparently. That's what we've been hearing, in these type of areas.
It becomes part of the wetlands, essentially.
Yeah.
yeah. So it protects the unique ecological sensitivity, yeah.
And
Prevents the destruction or significant change to the natural and artificial wetlands. It's not involved in the wetlands. So it's that, it's.
you on 1200.01, is that what you're looking at?
I'm going through the A, B, C, D. E.
Yeah.
So D, protect wildlife habitats and maintain the corridors. Well, they pointed out where the corridors are and whatnot, and this, they're going to make every attempt not to,
Well,
they're not even in that area. It's
we're gonna have a stipulation on the
well, no,
wildlife and the abutting properties too, so.
yeah, and they've agreed that they'll do what they can to prevent that, and it shouldn't. So protect the water supplies and existing aquifers. So they're not. Again, they're not near the any of the flowing streams or anything. So they're not. This was the one he didn't really say anything about, but to prevent expenditure of municipal funds for the purposes of providing or maintaining essential services or utilities which might be required as a result of the misuse of the wetlands. Prevent the minimizing.
As a result of the misuse of the wetlands, yeah. Not expecting any.
Correct.
That's a private road. Encourage those low-intensity uses that can be harmoniously and appropriately and safely located in or near the wetlands.
That's,
This is not, this is not a big pond or anything. It's just like.
so I'd agree with that. That's the case.
Yeah. So then 3 is to use or actively propose and its intended impacts cannot be reasonably avoided. It's a natural slope from what they were talking about. All that goes down there anyway, so they had to kind of disturb some of the. They have a main part where the pond is, but they had to disturb some of the buffer to create the pond, and I don't know if there's no impact or anything.
I think the only way to avoid it is to actually take storage units out and put the retention pond, in the upland area, but is that reasonable to ask them to do that?
Well, no,
No, because
I don't think
the retention pond is actually in the best place on the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the lowest point.
Yeah, it's natural
The
flow. I
water's
like the
gonna
idea.
naturally water
Because I
flow
thought
to
they
it.
were going to be piping stuff and putting in
I did too. So-
in-ground drains and all that. So this is all natural. It's all there anyway. So I thought that was a great idea. You're not disturbing any of the soils or anything or tearing up any, the land.
So you went through all of 1200.01, is that correct?
Yeah.
So I still got a few more to go through here then.
Well, I just did.
No, this is 1208. I got to finish going through 1208.01. You went through 1200.
Go on number 3. This is part
Oh,
of,
okay.
that's part of 12 whatever it is. So
Okay.
I just talked about that it can be shown that the least damaging route, I think that it was all natural.
Yeah.
What they're saying. So I think they're taking the natural route, and it can be shown that reasonable and accessible impact mitigation measures have been incorporated where necessary and appropriate. to minimize wetland loss, or there's not going to be any wetland lost. They're not going into the wetlands or anything, so they're not degrading the wetlands. So I don't think that applies in this case. And, so then they talked about the rare and endangered species, and I think what you were talking about is make sure that
We can still create a pathway through that back section because it's on land around it.
yeah, and that they make sure they don't disrupt that, and they provide for the endangered species that have been detected in the area. Let's see how you snake.
Maybe you don't want to say one. Is that all of them?
Yeah.
We're good?
I'm good.
Okay.
So it looks like we have all that covered.
So before I vote, I want to make
Well,
sure,
she wants it to put in, do we need to specify those, when you,
that's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask just to, before we do a motion, I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Can you just repeat
I
what the
can.
stipulations were? I think
Yes.
there's three.
There will be no more than 5,800 square feet of impact to the wetland buffer, and the pond shall be no closer than 30 feet to the wetland. The project shall be designed to the extent possible to protect the identified rare, threatened, and endangered species, and stabilization of the pond shall occur immediately after the pond construction.
okay,
Perfect.
you would have said that right.
No, I like that better. All right, so we have a motion. Oh, I don't have a motion yet. Do
I
have
make a motion that we grant the special exception to section 1208 of the zoning ordinance to prevent stormwater retention pond with the included
Previously mentioned stipulations.
Stipulations. So I have a motion to grant the special exception from section 1208 to permit a stormwater retention pond in the Wetlands Conservation District on map 22, lot 11, with the aforementioned stipulations. Do I have?
I'll have a second on that.
Have a second? Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? So that motion carries 5-0. So that's three pieces, and you're coming right up to that one. Okay. I think we've gone through those. So now we're ready to start on the gas station, but we're gonna start with the frontage piece first.
And we're prepared to go forward. My only question to you is whether you want to hear this now and take it up, or you want to wait for that last variance to be posted and take it up. I mean,
That's what I was gonna ask. Do they want to do all of them at once?
We have
They're
a,
gonna have to come back to us anyway next
I
month.
can tell you, we have two big ones already scheduled for next month, plus his piece for the underground pipe.
Pipe.
That's what I know I have. So I have a full schedule without pushing any of this further.
Okay.
So whatever we push now is going to push something else out further. That's, I know that. I can just tell.
Let me make my
So-
presentation. You can ask questions, and you may close the public hearing and then deliberate later, or whatever you want to do. But at least we
Okay.
get as much in as we can, I think.
Yep.
So this next variance is the variance from the requirement of 500 feet of frontage where 395.5 feet is available.
I would like to correct that, that's the actual frontage is 455 feet.
450.
Can you say that again, sir?
The frontage of this lot is 455, which is the total of 395.52 plus 59.79. So this arc of the property goes to about here, and then there's another 59. So the total is 455.
455, and you're seeking a variance to,
Because you're required to have 500.
okay, so you're seeking a variance for
45 feet.
45 feet.
How did
Instead
that
of
get
100.
missed from the original submission?
Past that.
It is unclear on the plan.
I think the plan was submitted to me, and I probably missed it. I think we talked about it in our group, but it obviously was missed not only by me, but the staff as well, because we all looked at the same plan. But I think there it must be the corner piece.
So
I
you-
think people interpreted the driveway line as a lot line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then plus the prior application had specifically cut the lot at a certain point. Might have been at that point as
Okay.
well. So the numbers carried forward. Originally in 2012, they were going to run a road through there, 50-foot wide road.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so that number got developed, I'm guessing by that fact.
So, quick question, what would the curb cut be at the development of the back area? What's that cut? The road, how wide is it now?
It's just a private driveway going.
Yeah, how wide is that driveway
I
now?
don't know, what did you design?
I think we're
30
proposing
feet?
20,
20
20,
20
20
feet
feet?
pavement width.
So again, I'll start over. Variance from 500 feet of frontage requirement where only 455 feet is available on the property. The first point is we're granting the variance to be contrary to the public interest. The interest is tied in with the purpose of the ordinance, and I didn't find anywhere in your ordinance as to why there's 500 feet required in this zone. So I can't even guess. I did find elsewhere in your ordinance where only 200 feet is required in other zones. But the best and most reasonable explanation for a long frontage would be line of sight. For example, if you have a gas station, people are pulling in and pulling out with more frequency than, say, shopping. And so it's better to have a bigger frontage. That would make sense to me. However, the fact that you allow 200 feet in another zone doesn't make sense to me, because either it's consistent in town, you need a place to pull in and pull out, or you don't. I also thought, well, maybe it's a higher speed limit, but that's not true. The speed limit in the other zone is the same as the speed limit here. So I think the final guess I might have is you're in a northern commercial district where they wanted to encourage lots of shops. So they're anticipating, the zoning ordinance might have anticipated more development with more cars coming and going up and down that street. Again, I think we can answer all those questions, but the fundamental concern I have is there's no stated purpose, so I can't determine whether we're contrary to that purpose. I can only say 500 feet's a big bit of frontage for property. As you can see, whether you grabbed another 50 feet or not, the design will be about the same. In this case, what I think helps us in this situation is the property to our north is the conservation land. Cars coming and going out of there, very minor traffic. Maybe if the purpose was to have as much frontage so you have as much visibility and as much gapping as possible. We're only 45 feet off, and the property next to us has a great deal of frontage and only one small entrance, and it's a very passive use. So I think you have to consider that in evaluating whether this proposed use of the property for a gas station, which is permitted by special exception, whether having 45 feet too little is contrary to the public interest. My argument is, in this instance, it would not be. That there is adequate site distance. If you've driven on that property, as you can see on the map, that is a straight portion of Charles Bancroft for 455 feet, straight along the front. In fact, there's only a little tail at the very end, this part that we just discovered. So we have almost 500 feet of straight frontage as opposed to, it might be 500 feet of curved road. It might be another reason they want 500 feet. If you have a curved frontage, your site visibility isn't as good. This has excellent site visibility. The property to the north, as indicated on the plan, is also on the straight line. So as you come by the Conservation Commission property from the north, you have good site visibility. So I would argue that having 35 feet less on this property would not be contrary to public interest. It's also not contrary to purpose, although it is not in keeping with the exact distance. The purpose of the ordinance, as I say, has to be to provide adequate gapping and spacing between the use on this property for gas station and the adjacent uses. So bearing that in mind, what are the adjacent uses? The north, fairly passive conservation. The south, as a home and garage, also has a big frontage to it. So you have a lot of good adequate spacing, and I think you're satisfying the concerns in the ordinance, even though you don't meet the exact number of the ordinance. If you grant the variance and allow the gas station on less than 500 feet, will you be altering the character of the neighborhood? That's the fundamental question here. The character of the neighborhood is, as I described, commercial in nature. And I don't believe it's our position that you will not be altering the character by putting a gas station, which is permitted by special exception, on a lot with only 45 feet less than what is required by the ordinance. It's not a substantial change, it's just a minor change. It's technically less than 10% off of the requirement. There'll be no threat to health, safety, and welfare. In this instance, the difference between 455 and 500 feet, the 45-foot difference is going to be a matter of an extra 45 feet of site visibility, which, as I say, it's a 10% difference. I don't think there's any threat of health, safety, and welfare due to the fact that it's on a straight point of Charles Bancroft Highway at the entrance and exit of the gas station. Number 3, substantial justice will be done. This is a reasonable use because it's a permitted use by special exception. The fact that we're only 45 feet less, this is an overly large frontage for any lot, minimum lot size in the area. So we almost meet it. We can't really acquire from the Conservation Commission. We've had discussions with the neighbor to the south who's here, and they're not ready to sell any space, nor should we force them to sell. They're currently residing and using the property. So I think the other point here is, as we indicated, this is all wetlands. This last 59 feet, in fact, is wetland.
Sorry.
It's all wetland. So if you acquired from the south, you still wouldn't be spreading out your entry points anywhere else on 500 feet. You'd be stuck keeping them within the district. So if one of the purposes and one of the reasons for having this 500 feet is to spread it out as much as possible, adding 50 feet isn't going to do anything in this instance. Substantial justice, as I say, would be done because it will allow this reasonable use. There'll be no harm to the public by having a shortfall of 45 feet in this instance. There'll be no adverse impact on the values of the surrounding properties. I'm going to again refer to Mr. Rogers' opinion, who was talking about the requirement, states up front. He says frontage of 395 feet, so he read the plan the same way that I read it, which is incorrect. It's 455 feet, but his conclusion was it's not going to adversely affect the value of surrounding properties to be short on the frontage. The key element of any gas station or any convenience store is what's the site visibility. That's what planning boards worry about. That's what everyone worries about. You don't need to worry about that when you have 455 out of 500 feet requirement and it's on a straight line. And finally, the hardship argument. The property is unique. I've made the case. I think you've even accepted the fact that this is a unique piece of property by granting relief to the back side of the property. This is unique because it is a very large lot, frontage-wise. It's just not quite big enough. And there's no way for us to acquire from the north or the south. Because of its uniqueness, enforcing it and making a 500-foot requirement bears no fair and substantial relationship to whatever purpose the ordinance has in mind for 500 feet. Being off by 10% on a straight and narrow, good shot with good site visibility, with low usage on either side, north or south. And we know conservation is never going to change. That's not going to be a high intensity use. The south might change, so I can't say that it wouldn't. But it is an excellent, I ride my bike by there all the time. It's an excellent visibility. I did it just twice this weekend and I'll make sure I was comfortable. Cars could see everything coming and going. So enforcing it and requiring 500 feet is no fair and substantial relationship to the purpose of having the 500 feet in this instance because of the uniqueness of the property. Finally, is the proposed use reasonable? It's reasonable because it's permitted by special exception, but that's the use of the gas station. The question is the proposed use of 455 feet versus 500 reasonable? And I would argue a 10%, less than 10% drop in the required frontage is in fact reasonable. So that's my argument on the variance of 500 feet of frontage.
Has the state commented on being state highway?
That would be in driveway permit time. We have to go through the planning board, get your driveway permits. They're gonna tell us where we go, what we do.
Wow, you got widen the turn lane
Yep.
and all that stuff.
And the planning board design features as well, turning radius.
Mhm.
They also do site visibility, may require a traffic study.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering. I mean, has there been any discussion about possibly needing a traffic light out there?
Traffic. Oh, and three.
Yeah.
We're gonna get a traffic light.
Again, that's a planning board issue.
Traffic.
Yeah, I think.
I think the difference between 455 and 500 isn't going to determine
No.
that. many.
Traffic light in town.
You did mention
We wanted
visibility,
to-
and if I remember correctly,
Southern Horse.
I saw, I think on your gas station plan, you got diesel pumps, so you're looking at tractor trailers, dump trucks, those kind of things,
Yeah.
full-size tractor trailers?
Yes.
So you would want good visibility if you're an 18-wheeler pulling out of there,
And they're probably gonna.
somebody
make it
coming
do it.
at you.
I think you probably had the ultimate testimony in the earlier case, which I would ask be brought forward to this case for the record from Mr. Charbonneau, who owns Continental Paving, who does drive trucks, and said this would be a good site for this. So I just point that out to the board that he has over 350 of those multi-wheelers going up and down that road.
I think DOT will make them do
Yeah.
a study anyway.
They'll make you do
They
that.
did that to the car warehouse.
Yeah, they
Yes.
did, yeah.
They make you evaluate what your car,
Did a wide
number of
around there
cars,
and everything.
how wide your turning radius is. Can a tractor trailer easily get in and out of there? All of that gets evaluated. And we would have to do that for the planning board site plan.
Okay. This will all come up again on the next piece, it sounds like. Or
You
we'll gloss
mentioned
over it.
that part of the frontage is different in other areas. Do you have any details on that?
Just your zoning ordinance
Did you look in
requirement
here? Did
is,
you look in here?
I did. I just wanted to see what.
Yeah, well, that's kind of crazy. They, well, it says on 3A, 200 feet. And then, but the only place where it talks about 500 is in the
Gas
special
line sales.
exception.
Yeah, for the gasoline sales, I know. Yeah, I've had a couple of discussions with the planning board, because I was confused myself.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's difficult to make changes unless you're really looking at this document in its totality and trying to see how this change impacts something else. And
right, and so we
It's not
accept
an
it
easy
as
job, I
as it
get it.
is. All I can argue
Yeah.
is I don't know the real purpose, but I could understand it might be appropriate to have a little bit larger in one area than another.
Yeah.
But they more than doubling. In any event, my point is we're only 10% off. And our argument is that that is not going to be contrary to whatever intent of having 500 feet.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? On this one? Any other, before I open up public input? Nope. All right, at this time, I'll open up public input. Yeah, you didn't say anything about the gas station.
you up there again? You're the only public here.
You can stand.
I need the exercise. Warren Adams, 507 Charles Bancroft Highway. And I think it's ridiculous that they even require 500 feet, and it's an excellent sight distance. You can see in and out. You're going to have tractor trailers going in there anyways because they got to deliver the gas. And it's excellent for, place to put it, I think. That's basically all I have to say. And Litchfield needs a gas station, a convenience store.
Isn't that 7-Eleven, it's on 102? Is that Litchfield or Hudson?
That's Litchfield.
That's Litchfield.
That's Litchfield. And also that probably has 500 feet of frontage, but there's
I don't
a
know
shopping
about that.
mall there.
across the street. Yeah.
Yeah, no, right in there is a mall.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true too.
Yeah.
Harold Place.
I
In
don't
other
know
words,
about-
this here is just a gas station by itself.
I don't know about the 500 feet of frontage though.
Pardon?
On 102, I don't know about that.
Yeah, you really think that's 500
I think
feet?
it's less.
That's right.
That doesn't really,
Anybody else?
doesn't make sense.
I make a motion, we close.
Wait.
You got what?
I had another question, but I'm losing it already.
Sorry.
It's all right. Yeah, probably. Well, I don't want to make the mistake of closing public input and then not be able to ask my question.
You can deliberate while the public hearing's still open.
Yeah.
That's fine. And then if you have a question as you deliberate, you can ask it.
Sure.
That way we can freely ask questions.
I said, an attorney here to get around those things.
Close the public input, we can just deliberate.
We can right now.
Did you see what the frontage is on 102? You have it right in front of you?
No, yeah.
What's required on 102?
Well, that's what he's saying. It's not clear because of one area says 802.02, it talks about 3A, 200 feet. But then when you get down into the special exception about gas stations, it says 500 feet required.
But
So you-
200 feet on any other town road, which
Correct.
should include 102,
Correct.
because that's any other town.
Well, it's specific here. It says frontage on 102, 200 feet.
So that's any other town road. I was right.
No, that's another.
That's actually a state
No,
road.
that's another statement. It says, all other town roads and lots accessible provided from the road other than 3A or 102 is 150 feet.
150 feet.
Yeah.
So only the special exception delineates
500.
3A and everything else.
No, the special exception is only talking about gas
Gas
stations.
Right.
And
For 3A
On,
and everything else.
yeah, on any road, you would
Right.
need 500 feet of frontage.
Only on 3A.
On any road.
No, it says 3A and then
specific.
200
200
feet.
feet on any other town.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very specific about.
That's what's
3A.
odd about the ordinances.
They changed it, yeah.
It's just
on
3A. It's
Yeah.
just in this
Because they
area.
have the special exception for gas stations in other commercial districts.
They
and
do.
It's not the same.
That's correct.
I know. That's why I question it too.
This is a family.
And I would also say that in looking at the tax map, there is one other lot that this could happen, and that's the horse farm. Other than that, nobody else has the length of frontage required. I also, Mr. Chair, want to point out, I looked at the tax map, it has 395 feet of frontage, which is, I think, where I got to 395. This was
Well, we're confident the new
We-
number is,
we now have,
if we
a
approve it, we'll probably be specific on the number, so. I
We have
just wanna
an-
make sure you're good with it.
yeah, we have a survey plan, and we're confident on the survey plan.
I was gonna ask you just to make sure I know,
Yes.
the conservation land you're referring to, which
Yes.
I believe is to the north.
Yep.
Is that where they park right under the power lines practically and walk the
Almost.
trails back down?
Pretty
there?
close, that's correct,
Really
yeah.
close to it, yes. That is the land.
Those are
you're
the
talking
trails that they walk down in there.
I'm gonna have to go down.
about. It goes all the way down to the
Yeah.
trolley tracks, which is the
You can get
back side
ticks
of
for the year.
the property.
A what?
Ticks.
I ticks? I don't get ticks.
If you walk down there, you will.
Focus.
Thank you.
I make a motion to close public input.
Second.
Okay. All those, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Where's everybody stand on this? Any opinions?
Do you need the application?
I would love it. I'm coming to you this time. Thank you.
We need the 5 points, okay, so. What's the
Do you
first?
agree with that though? That's gotta be it.
This is all their explanations.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the public interest.
And I don't want to simplify it, but I kind of agree with what was said here, that the 45, now it's 45 feet.
Yeah.
It's quite a big difference from 100 and.
I would have liked to hear his argument for.
105, yeah.
And I'm familiar with the area. I'm sure you guys are too.
Go by that a lot.
Visibility is very good on that road.
It's
That's what we're
really good
discussing.
for
It
the
really
north.
is. That's
It's
a big concern.
really
for me.
good for the north. It's like straight away. There is a slight curve right at the
At the
south
end.
side.
So the
That's what I was
south,
looking at.
the south side, and maybe you could tell me, that's where that garage, it's a brown garage, kind of sits
That's back.
back.
Yeah,
That's the south side of it.
Yeah.
yeah.
So
There's a
yeah,
slight
yeah,
curve
there's
there.
a slight curve there, but
Yeah, and that's where the curve starts, just
Yeah,
after that or just after the garage.
I feel like the view coming out of there would be pretty good.
It's not bad.
Well, and as he was saying, you can't use any of that. It's not like you can spread out because it's not the conservation. I mean, it's wetlands. You can't even use that. So they are.
Yeah. They're not gonna move the driveway even if they acquire a piece of land there
No.
because it's wet there.
That's wet.
And the driveways are like 2/3 of the way to the north
Yep.
anyhow.
So how about this? So let's say, just for discussion, that this wasn't a gas station and it was a very popular convenience store. You have almost the same number of people coming in and out, right?
Or even a restaurant for that.
But
A restaurant.
in that situation, you wouldn't need 500 feet,
Right.
but you'd still have a lot of people coming in and out.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
It's only
You'd
the
have
gas
200.
station that goes for 500.
So. Go ahead and read, so she can take the notes on here.
Hey,
She needs you to read.
It should address all the points.
So let me ask one more time. So if it was a restaurant, we weren't talking about a gas station. If it was a restaurant, how many feet would it be for frontage?
200.
200.
Okay. Okay.
That's like,
So the only issue is if there'll be 18 wheelers being gassed up there. Because when they pull out, they take a long time to get onto the road.
and the state is going to address that, you know, they are.
That's right.
Yes, they're gonna do with their
If
traffic
you were
study.
here for the hearing on the auto glass,
Yeah, I was actually here for
and
that.
they had to put in slow down lanes.
Yeah. So we don't have to worry
Virtually.
about that so much. I would agree. Okay.
Because that would be the same even if they had the 500 feet.
Right.
all right, I'll go through the criteria. First one, variance will not be contrary to the public interest because the applicant is saying that,
Okay, I'm sorry.
no, that's all right. The applicant is saying that the lot has significantly more frontage than many of the neighboring parcels. It allows for excellent access to and from the site based on the design they have, and the visibility. And the proposed construction would not threaten public health, safety, or welfare as a specific design for stormwater management, fuel storage, and fuel leak management will ensure public safety and health. And the proposed gas station meets all
We
the
haven't talked
criteria
about
for
that.
northern
Yeah,
commercial.
Talk about that.
How did I get northern commercial?
So I think-
Am I on the wrong thing?
Yeah.
So I
I am on
think
the wrong thing.
I think this parcel is unique
It's not reading what I
in
gave him.
that that
I'm reading the wrong one.
there is over 500
Did I give you
feet
the wrong
of
Maybe.
of visibility, which is I think that
This
they're
is
trying
number-
to do. There's over 500 feet of visibility due to the
you give
uniqueness
me
of
this?
the parcel.
Here's a spare one if you want. Give me that one.
That's the same thing.
I think so. Yeah, this is the frontage variance, so it's basically the same language, really. Yeah, same language.
We're just talking about the 500 feet, so I
Yeah,
think that's plenty.
That's it.
I mean,
This should be 455, not 395.5, right?
Correct.
so I think that's,
So I think the uniqueness of the parcel meets the intent, the spirit of the spirit/intent of the ordinance.
Oh, so contrary to public interest for me, it is an allowed use. The relief they seek is the 45 feet. And it doesn't seem like, granting the variance is going to harm the public in any way.
Yeah.
Based on safety and health and welfare of the public, not going to diminish properties. Oh, that's actually a whole nother one. But that to me covers number one. Number two, construction of a gas station on the lot. While approximately 45 feet less than required will not change the character of the neighborhood. I think that's correct, considering the abutting properties that we've already discussed. Again, there's no threat to public health, safety, or welfare.
And it's a permitted use by special exception.
Yeah, and they're still gonna have the two entrances, or, separate entrance and egress.
Yeah.
Based on the way they, the plan that they presented anyways. Number 3, substantial justice is done because the gas station is a permitted use by special exception. So long as all the criteria are met, and in this case, it does meet the other criteria, which I don't know if we need to read them, but
But we haven't gotten to the presentation of that application
oh,
yet.
yeah, that's true too.
Right.
We haven't gotten to that. We just, true. Yeah. But we do know that it doesn't meet this.
So I think that granting that will give them relief for later on when we talk about the special exception. It's 45 feet. That doesn't, we're granting them, and it's also, within the, well, you still have that wetland thing that I'm talking about, so, you're going to be shy.
Yeah, to add on to the lot, what you're saying is,
It wouldn't-
right now he can't even get additional land.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah,
actually done the taking the steps to at least inquire about it with the abutters. So the effort was made
It
there.
wasn't going to change the
And
entrances.
that's not gonna change, at least not now. Again, it's a permitted use, provided they get relief from this. So it seems to me that substantial justice would be done. By granting, if we don't see any harm to the public from the 45-foot relief.
I think
Values.
the value of the property is not going to be diminished because it's fits well within the other commercial properties that are there. It actually improves upon them, I think. It's already set up for commercial.
Yeah, so it seems like granting the 45 feet does not really affect the value of the properties, given that it's an allowed use otherwise.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about doing is, reducing the frontage requirement that really should have, that in itself should have no impact on surrounding properties. Hardship. Level enforcement of provisions of the ordinance will result in an unnecessary hardship because.
Well, it's a permitted use, and we're only talking about 45 feet, and again, that's
So-
adding the.
So for the no fair and substantial relationship between the general purpose of the ordinance and the specific application of that provision to this property. Now we're talking specifically on the property itself. It is a large lot. It's unique in its frontage, in that there aren't a lot of lots in the area that do have that kind of frontage. I think the applicant has testified that the lot next to it actually has the frontage, which is a horse farm already. So
Well, it's a conservation land. That's the uniqueness of this lot. With the conservation land abutting it, provides and meets the intent of the ordinance. That's my opinion.
Because that's the biggest thing.
well, so are you saying because of the fact that they have good line of sight in both directions?
Exactly.
So the lot itself has good line of sight in both directions, therefore the 45 feet would not create
Is
a safe hazard, a safety risk or a safety hazard.
Well, we're talking about uniqueness of the.
A little bit, yeah, but I mean, as it applies to this specific property.
And the uniqueness would be, as you said, the conservation lands to the north plus the straight road.
right.
I mean, I'd like to say I don't understand why the 500-foot standard was applied here, but I
doesn't-
can't.
that-
I don't
that doesn't matter.
understand.
It was,
It is what it is.
right.
Why does it matter?
Well, I would say, why is it different from the others? I don't know.
Right.
You got enough?
I'm good. I'm ready for a motion.
Okay.
Thank you for humoring me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, please.
No stipulations.
Stipulations?
Nothing on this one that I can see anyways.
I make a motion that we grant the variance to Article 800, Section 803.00A-4 of the zoning ordinance to permit a frontage along 3A of
45 foot.
45-foot
Variance.
What are you trying to do? Oh, sorry.
I'm trying to,
A 45-foot
45-foot deviation?
Deviation.
yeah, deviation, thank you, from the 500 feet required.
Okay, so I have a motion to grant the variance from Article 800, Section 803.001-4. Permit a gas station with frontage along 3A, which will, so you want to say which will deviate 45 feet from the 500-foot requirement.
Perfect.
Okay? So, with no stipulations, that's the motion. Although, do you have a second? I have a second from Tom. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Right.
Opposed? All right, that motion carries 5-0.
Okay, we're on to the last one.
Back to Morgan, so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Thank you.
I wish I knew what happened to mine. It's in this pile somewhere. So I gave them all up to you guys, I think.
So the
Me too.
last one is a special exception application. And it is a special exception to permit a gas station along Route 3A in the Northern Commercial District. And we have to meet criteria of Section 803A. And my application recites them, and I'm just going to run through them, and then I'll hand you the recitation so you can use it if you don't have it. First of all, shall not be located within a 500-foot radius of another gas station, another gasoline sales station located in the town of Litchfield, except where the existing station is located across a major road from which the proposed station takes access. The nearest gas station in this instance is 2.4 miles away, and it's located in Manchester. Number two, pumps shall be set back at least 50 feet from the right-of-way. We're agreeing that the pumps shall be set back from Route 3A at least 50 feet. So you may want to make the stipulation, should you see fit to approve, that the pumps shall be a minimum of 50 feet back from 3A. Two access egress points shall be provided. The plan as presented shows the pumps not only 50 feet back, but two access points being. So you might consider approving either a direct stipulation of two access points or approximately as presented by
At
the
least
plan.
two access points.
Frontage shall be at least 500 feet along Route 3A and 200 feet around on other town-approved roads. We applied for and you just granted a variance, so we meet that criteria because we have relief. Number 5, all underground storage tanks shall be double-lined and contain leak detection system in accordance with the state of New Hampshire standards. We are not proposing underground storage tanks. We are proposing above-ground storage tanks. I've given you the example of the vault. I'm not sure we need to go into great detail about it because the criteria is pretty specific. It only applies if we're going to be underground. Right. So unless you have questions, I'm not going to present a detailed explanation tonight, although we do have Mike here, our expert, who could describe these systems. He will undoubtedly be called upon to describe the underground piping, which is the next variance. But I don't think you want to hear that tonight because it's not even advertised.
I had one question.
Yes.
Will there be how do I say this? Will there be concrete containment around the tanks, or are the tanks open to sit on the ground?
Mike,
I seen the tanks. I see the type of design, but I just don't know if there'll be concrete work around it with the alarm system on the exterior side of it.
Good evening, everybody.
My name is Michael Redding with Lorero Engineering.
REDDING.
Yeah. So this picture kind of details and addresses your question. The primary tank is a steel tank, and then encased around that tank is concrete. So the concrete offers a secondary containment structure where if the primary steel tank experiences any sort of corrosion, that concrete tank, which is a monolithic structure surrounding the steel, will then serve as the means to capture any liquid and protect it from releasing outside the structure.
So there
of
is
the tank.
there's a secondary mitigation system in it.
Correct. Yeah, so they have it's basically what they're calling a primary tank and then an integrated secondary system versus where if you had an above ground tank that sat in like a open vault, kind of like a septic tank or something like that, that
That's
would
what
be
I've seen in
open
the
on the
past.
top and you would have walls around the side and it would sit inside. That would be a non-integrated system. This is integrated and it has a means to check to see if there is any leaks, as well as alarms that will notify the owner in the event that there are.
Okay. I didn't see the plan, so I had to ask that. My own. Just for my own.
Yeah, I appreciate it. At least got something, do something.
I seen you waving your hand over there.
Number 6, such uses will not create undue traffic congestion or hazard. As I previously explained on the last application for variance. This use will not create undue traffic congestion or hazard. It has greater than 400 feet of line of sight in both directions, abuts conservation land to the north, has limited traffic flow, and the existing V3A has more than adequate capacity for accommodating the traffic to be generated. And there will be adequate stacking room on the site for traffic exiting the site. And we got plenty of width to back up the cars, plenty of length along the frontage. So we don't believe it will create undue traffic congestion or hazard. The gas station convenience store, it's not a mall. Right? But as the chair has pointed out, we will have to go and get a driveway permit anyway, and the planning board is going to review the traffic impact. So I think we have to make a cursory demonstration here tonight, and we've done that by the length of the footage and the plan that's submitted and the adequacy of the stacking room. I believe we've met that requirement. And that's it. Thank you. As I said, Mike is here if you have any other questions about any of the design of the tank or the pumps or anything else. But
Can you just briefly, I'm going to assume underground storage, above ground storage, they're not equal. One's probably preferred over the other. Can you define which one is?
underground storage requires a variance.
Okay. But in terms of safety or, design, is one more expensive? Is one safer in this particular environment where there's an aquifer protection district involved, let's say? Is above ground more desirable than below ground? Is one more expensive than the other? And why?
I can't answer that. I don't know if Mike can. Yeah.
Because I know it was originally presented as below ground. And I know the Conservation Commission originally had
Did
some
not
concerns
want it.
about that.
Again, we did go to the Conservation Commission with this application, and we discussed with them the above-ground nature. We spent a fair amount of time with them going through the details of the entire above-ground system and how it would work and why it was better than below ground, although there are plenty of safety mechanisms. One of the sheets that I did submit, the AST environmental protection features, which Mike can talk about, describes all of the pluses of above ground and how it's sealed.
Yeah, if we could just get the highlights. So I'm just looking for the highlights. That'd be
Absolutely,
terrific.
yeah. So,
All right.
so I guess the biggest difference is that you're able to see your tank and see what its condition is when it's above ground versus below ground. When it's below ground, you're relying on the technology to tell you. There's a couple of inspection points, but for the most part, you're relying on the technology to give you the indication that the tank is competent. it depends kind of on with regards to cost. It depends on site conditions. So I would say that they're probably about equal because the bells and whistles that you need for underground to ensure that you're relying on robust technology and that they're not going to fail and they have backup systems adds cost. Whereas if you just have a straight primary steel tank that's above ground, very simple construction, low cost. But in this case, we wanted to make sure that it's also safe. It has all the safe elements of blast, fire, and basically ballistics proof. So it's essentially bomb proof, and that adds a lot more cost. So essentially they become equal. The advantages and disadvantages obviously is when you can put things underground, you're now utilizing your surface to its fullest potential for further parking and other amenities, similar to the way that nowadays they'll put stormwater detention in pipes and other structures below ground so that they can then have paved surfaces. The tank being below ground has the same purpose. It offers, however, a risk when it's below ground. Because those systems cannot be visually verified, right? So there's nothing more valuable than seeing it and being able to give testimony that it is competent. When you're relying on those backup technology systems, you just have to make sure that they're constantly working, you're constantly maintaining them. So having them above ground provides you with the greater assurances that they're not leaking. And that you're maintaining and addressing them when needed, if needed.
It's good. Appreciate it. I would like to read into the record another letter from the Conservation Committee dated February 14, 2019. Read tax map 22, lot 11. Litchfield Conservation Commission met on February 5th, 2019. Mr. Rene Thoreau again presented the conceptual plan for a proposed gas station with 4 pumps, a diesel island, and a car wash at the above-mentioned parcel. The commission has gone on site walks at the location and gone over the data that has been presented so far. At this time, the commission voted that they will not oppose the idea of a gas station on the site. Per zoning section 1250.00, the Aquifer Protection District, the Conservation Commission has reviewed and comment per section 1261.00 when the plan is submitted for site plan review to the planning board. Oh, so all they're saying is they'll have additional comment and review during the planning board review process. I didn't see a drive-through car wash, but that's
It's not a drive-through, it's 3 bays in the back.
Okay. I think there's some pictures of a convenience store
Yes, we submitted those.
package.
Yep.
And I thought I saw on here somewhere, there's like empty tenant space, 1 and 2.
Yes,
So this is gonna have, in addition to a convenience store,
we don't know.
gas station, additional tenant spaces.
We don't know
around the
what.
store?
Yes, that's correct. We don't know. If it's not a permitted use, obviously, we'd have to be back here. But if it is a permitted use, we don't have to. Mr. Chairman, the only other thing I wanted to submit, what I forgot to, was there was a chain of emails that said back and forth. This one I'm going to read is from Frank Freitzel. I'm sorry, I might pronounce it wrong, but I believe he is the fire chief. Yes, and it says it's addressed to Joan McGibbon and a series of other people, I think Conservation Commission members, and it's dated February 5, 2019. Good morning, all. I have reviewed the attached information on the tanks as well as met and reviewed the proposed location and intent with the applicant. I do not see any concerns at this time. The system appears to have more than adequate leak control and fire protection measures built in. The fire department will do a complete review of the site plan during the planning board approval process. So we did vet this, and this brochure was what was attached to this email addressed from Mike to Renee and then passed on to the chief. So I will submit that as an additional piece of information to the board.
This letter from the Conservation Commission that I read said that the plan that they were looking at least, the conceptual plan, 4 pumps in the diesel island, is that still an accurate description of the plan?
Yes.
Proposed that we have in front of us today too?
Yeah, that's what you're seeing here. Four here and the diesel on the side
And then the car wash,
and the car wash in the back.
and then the storage tanks right over here.
Yep, there they are.
I've never been to a gas station. Has a tip on the cross.
Didn't we already approve 4 by approving 5?
Mm-mm.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. What's different? What do we,
This is a special exception for the use.
Right.
Whereas before was just a variance for the frontage.
They needed the variance in order to get the special.
okay.
We don't have to go through 5. No, we just say, they meet all these, we're out of here. Want to do that?
Well, I mean, not that simple, but
I think
do we have any
Look at
other
my
it
questions?
seems to be that. So
There will be. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah,
That's why I asked.
I have one question. The car wash, where's that draining to?
They recycle a lot of that, don't they?
Tobin can probably answer that.
Yeah. Tobin of Farwell again, Farwell Engineering. Yeah, in today's the car washes are they recycle the water, so it's all self-contained. It's not like the water just runs out. It's self-contained. This drains in the building as it's being happening, and
Supposed to run it through a filtration system and everything. Okay.
yeah. I don't know how black magic.
Some are better than others.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything else? No? Anybody?
So, you want to?
Do I have any, at this time, I'd like to open it up to the public, provide any input on gas station. Hearing none from the public. Any deliberation? Well, then what I'll do is I'll go through the criteria. So the first criteria, will not be located within a 500-foot radius of another gasoline sales station. I believe that meets the criteria based on what I've seen in the plan. Fuel pumps will be set back at least 50 feet from the public right away. Again, according to the plan, that is correct. If we want to make a stipulation, that's the minimum, that's fine. You can probably just capture this by making a stipulation that it meets all the requirements, for the special exception. With
With the variance.
With the variance.
Yeah.
Somehow we can word it, but we'll figure that out in a second.
I can do that.
Frontage, the frontage, yes. And then all underground storage tanks will not be double lined. This is really not applicable. They're using above ground tanks. Such uses shall not create undue traffic congestion or hazard. This is one where, again, to me, if we were to compare this to many other commercial uses, you'd have similar traffic patterns.
And it's going to be addressed in the planning.
More so in the planning board, but they wanted this to be a special exception that we approved, and they put that criteria in there.
So I know, we can
We have
refer
to
that
do
they
something.
are working with the planning board to ensure that there will be. And we agree.
So if you have other people in there besides the gas station, there's a potential that there someday could be a drive up.
Absolutely.
Will they be back then for a drive up permit?
It's funny, I don't know, I can't tell you for sure.
It's going to depend on what your zoning ordinance says at that
Right,
time.
I think they removed,
It's
Yeah.
required for a drive up, yeah.
Okay.
it is, because I thought they removed the drive-up language.
No, that's in
No,
there.
it's still there.
Is it
They
still
don't
there?
want McDonald's.
Okay.
They don't want fast food. They don't want drive-ups.
Maybe
It's in
that's
the
that.
spe-
I was
it's
hoping
in
for
the-
Burger King and McDonald's.
Huh?
Yeah. But yeah, we don't really know what the other uses would be and what kind of traffic they might generate. All they could do, but I don't have right now.
So that'll be part of the study anyway, traffic study.
Yes.
Right, that's number C.
So,
So really, on number
Okay.
6, I think it passes the test, just based on what I've seen so far.
Laura, you're going to make the motion?
News to you.
News to me? Okay.
I gotta make a motion.
Okay.
I gotta get back to
Well,
the.
let's kind of spread it
This is
around.
the special
Nah,
exception.
it's fine.
This is a special exception. Yep.
Yeah, I had to get to the right page.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to grant the special exception from section 803A of the zoning ordinance to permit the operation of the gas station in the,
I'll tell you, the area has been
what's it, the northern,
satisfactory. And you want to note this?
Did you want a condition of approval that the final design will continue to comply with all the special exception criteria?
That's what I would
Yes.
like, yes.
Thank you.
That's exactly what we wanted to say.
Good thing you're here.
It helps having someone who knows how to say that.
Yeah,
The condition of approval is that the final design will continue to comply with all special exception criteria.
So I have a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Okay. I have seconded. Any further discussion?
No.
No. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your patience and
Nice to wait
see you
me.
next month.
We'll do something again, huh?
Do you want me to email you the notices of decision?
Yeah, that would be great.
Can you give me a couple days?
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay.
What am I required by law? It's 5 days, I think I have, don't I?
To get the notices of decision out,
Yeah,
you need to have the
100
minutes on file within 5 days, and the notice of decision ideally is out within 5 days as well.
Yeah, 140.
5 business days.
Yeah.
They changed it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's my
Because I've always counted the weekend on that.
Yep, they changed it.
might be fired away.
Yeah, right.
So I'd like to make a
Thank you.
motion.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Have a good night.
Thanks. So we'll see you.
Thanks, Warren.
next month.
Yeah.
And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put you first on the agenda because we've made so much headway on this. My hope is that we're able to move along and not have you wait for
I
Rick
think
Charbonneau
I
and.
think I'm handling Rick Charbonneau, and there's another one too.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, there's the,
You can move to
Here we go.
power company, Eversource.
I'm not doing that.
You're not doing Eversource? There's one that just came in, but I'm gonna push them out till September.
That's,
Is that a garage?
that's
I haven't even
McQuestion.
looked at it yet.
That's McQuestion, I think.
It might be, I don't know, but they came in late anyway.
Frontage variance.
I haven't even looked. All I got a letter from Troy says it.
And I think we owe you a check and I said, wait to get the check and for you to do the mailings.
For which
For
one's
next
that?
month.
Next
For
one.
the-
For this,
For 5A?
for the gas station.
Oh, I already sent that out.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I picked up the check yesterday and I sent it out yesterday.
Okay. Good.
So you'll probably get it in a couple of days.
Thank you.
Thank
Good to
you.
see you.
Good night.
So that's on August and I'll put you on first.
Laura, can I ask you a
Thank
question?
you.
Yeah, of course.
On, when they were talking, did the motion for the stormwater retention pond, the stipulation, I didn't quite catch the whole thing and I want to get it right.
Yep.
in a minute.
So there were 3 conditions of approval.
Do we need to keep this in the public meeting or should I just close it?
You can close it.
All right.
I
think
make a
we have
motion, we
nothing else
close
on the
it.
Agenda. I have a motion from Greg to close.
I'll second it.
Seconded from Tom. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aye.
Is that to adjourn?